All right, we are back in session, and we'll continue with the SLA committee meeting with Chairman Buxton.
Thank you, Chairman Davis. Unfortunately, I've lost my vice chair, Dr. Oxendine, who's going back to teach her class, which we certainly appreciate. We're going to, members, juggle the schedule here a little bit because of some schedules of guests we have. We're going to start, if you're looking at your agenda, under new business, and we're going to do the multi-tiered system of support implementation update first, and that is B, so 4B, and then we will go to the discussion item SLA 3 on course for credit, and then we'll come back to SLA 2 and then back down to the new business. So the first item of business will be multi-tiered system support implementation update. Dr. Petrie Martin. Dr. Vossi.
Well, thank you. And do we have the PowerPoint? Okay,
it's coming up.
That is so great. Thank you, Deanna.
What was working?
Wow, I can't think of a better thing to do today than spend some time with you, getting some implementation update. And a couple years ago, can I say that? Mr. Davis asked us to give frequent or sometimes implementation updates, especially leading up to the July 1, 2020 SLD policy change. And so with me, I have colleague Matt Hoskins who'll be talking about our data, and then we have folks from Allegheny, where it started to snow, so we want to get them on the road back. Brianne Hall will be talking about the implementation in Allegheny County to put some context to it. So, first, I want to put this in the context of what you've been hearing about from Dr. Petrie Martin and Dr. Nancy Barber about the regional support team. Our division, Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems, is going to be part of this regional support team. And as you can see from this graphic, the different professional development opportunities and divisions will be supporting in regional support. And Brianne will be able to talk about the benefits that they've seen in Allegheny from having a regional support in general. But our work will be integrated continuously within the regional support structure. So these are the three topics we're going to cover, is give you a little bit about where we've been because we've grown. We are a division that continues to grow its staff, not because of extra funding, but the collaboration here in the agency. Our team started as a team of 1, which was me, to now we're at 17. And again, that's because of the EC division moving positive behavior intervention support into the gen ed space, which is where we are, which makes sense. And that's what we ask districts to do as well. Take a look at your resources and see how we can utilize them. Then Matt's going to talk about the data piece that we've been collecting, and then Brianne's going to talk about how we're being more responsive to students and educators. So here where we've been within North Carolina. I do want to point out the strength of this board and the agency, and that we are the only state that drives this work from the state agency. Everybody else partners with technical assistance centers or universities to do this work. So this is outstanding about the work of a multi-tiered system of support. No one else in the nation is doing it the way that we're doing it, which is why it's actually sticking versus getting support other ways. Where we are now in 2017 and 18 is that you're hearing that we're actually going to be integrating academic and behavior supports into a full model. The field has been asking for this, instead of just talking about academic support and then behavior support in isolation, bringing them to an integrated model, because problem solving can't happen in isolation, has to capture all of those pieces. So you can see how we've grown over time. Also, in one of your handouts has the full functions of our division now, which does include things with social emotional learning, school-based mental health, nonviolent crisis intervention training. So we've taken everything that the behavior support section for Gen Ed was covering in the EC division, moved it to ours so that we're truly integrated within our model. I do want to remind us that sometimes MTSS can be called a process, which it is not. A process is not found anywhere within our documents. It is a framework for total school improvement. Our goal is to help school systems and charter schools use things more effectively and efficiently. So that way it's more efficient for staff and effective for students. That is the entire model that we do. And within that, we have 6 critical components. Typically, the triangle that we have seen in various formations gets most of the attention, and thinking about this is just about students who are struggling and for intervention. And what we see is that we have 6 critical components, and the triangle, or the 3-tiered instruction intervention model, cannot exist without the other 5. leadership, building infrastructure, taking a look at database problem solving. Taking a look, you'll see one of our critical components is data evaluation, which means looking at implementation data paired with outcome data. What Matt will talk about with our data is that we look at implementation data first and foremost because student outcome data is just the result of what the adults implemented. And that's where our focus is in this system design. So our statewide implementation model, again, it's unique across from the nation because of how we're doing it here. We do have our state level team. It is, I'm probably very biased, but they're amazing humans and brilliant. And they continue to innovate this model more and more as a response to what the field is asking for. That's where our decisions come from. What does the field need, and then how can we innovate? So we have our state level team, we have universal support. Then we have regional support, which is tailored based on the regions across North Carolina. Then each of the regional consultants does do some more tailored support for our districts and deciding, do they need just regular universal support, maybe more intensive, or something that might be a combination of those as well. And then the districts support the schools. From the state level, we don't support individual schools. We do support charter schools, but we don't go to the individual school level from our lens. We want to build capacity at the district for them to be able to sustain their own implementation. We decided in about 2014-15 to do a cohort implementation model in North Carolina, relying on implementation science. There's, I think, 4 of us now on the team that are state implementation specialists. Using this particular model, we know that readiness is a key factor for successful implementation. So we have a total of 5 cohorts. I'll talk about cohorts 1 through 4 right now. And we broke them up into cohorts based on readiness. Now, I do also want to emphasize that we did just invite districts to come and hang out with us, and they did. So that's really people in the nation, like, how'd you get everybody to participate? Well, we said, hey, we're here to help you build effective, efficient systems, and here's how we're going to support your work. And they said, sure, we'll come hang out with you and get that support. And so right now, cohorts 1 and 2 have been through our professional learning modules. We utilize our NESIS system, so that way it's a hybrid approach for professional development. We're able to have that be online and then also some face-to-face, but not much face-to-face support because we know that's the least effective way to support folks. We do a lot of virtual coaching, but I don't have staff driving all over the state. We do a lot of virtual coaching and then embed things within some more technical assistance areas. Cohorts 3 and 4, which were our last 2 formal cohorts to come on, are engaging in Module 3 right now, which is specifically about specific learning disability eligibility criteria, that change that's happening July 1, 2020. This entire implementation plan was joint between our division and the Exceptional Children's Division. What we learned from other states is that other states had sparsed this out and changed their SLD policy and then tried MTSS or vice versa. And sitting down at that time with Bill Hussey, it was, well, why don't we just do this together and build a 5-year implementation plan where it's a combined work. And that's why our implementation plan has been 5 years. We do have a cohort 5, and I have huge kudos out to our Office of Charter Schools and their communication and work that they do with us. We have 79% of charter schools within cohorts 1 through 5. Which is great. Just an invitation to come and be part of that work. We've tailored that professional development and support. We realize that there's more travel limitations there and then uniquenesses that happen. And so what we've done in our staff is that we have 3 people dedicated to our charter school support. We have 1 lead who covers just 1 big region, then 2 who are split on the other sides. And the participation from our charter schools is absolutely outstanding and continue to ask us to support their work. So I'm going to turn this over to Matt, who's going to go through the data, our statewide data, and talk about our self-assessment of MTSS.
Good afternoon. So I am looking forward to the opportunity to share some of the quantitative data that we have. But more importantly, Brianne is going to share that more of the qualitative data of what does this actually look like within the school system and what do these data mean. But to start with, I want to have a little bit of conversation about types of data. And frequently when we talk about data, we are using some kind of outcome data. So as a result of what the adults in school buildings are doing, what are the types of outcomes that we are achieving as a result of that? That's a really important set of data, and it helps us answer a really important question. And that question is, is the work we are doing, is it effective or is it not effective? However, we would argue that there is a further line of questioning that needs to be asked, is if it is effective or not effective, why is it effective? Or why is it not effective? And that's what really drives results and drives the work. And so this is a form of data referred to as implementation data. And we have a tool that we've worked on with Florida and are continuing to evolve to meet the needs of folks in North Carolina, called the Self-Assessment of MTSS. And this is a tool that allows us to collect our implementation data. So in regard to the self-assessment of MTSS, this tool is actually, we call it the self-assessment, but it's actually a tool that is facilitated. So we have individuals who are trained within the district, who have a good understanding of the rubrics that are involved with this tool and the artifacts that are required to score those rubrics, and they facilitate the process of obtaining these data. In addition to that, the most important word that I see up on that screen is validated. So the data that we get from this implementation measure, we can trust. We can trust that when it's facilitated well, that when the rubrics are used and when the correct artifacts and data sources are used, that different people would make the same decisions with those same sets of data. So it's an objective implementation tool. In addition to that, we also know that it's validated that the critical components that Amy mentioned, that those are the things that we're measuring. We are actually able to look at how is leadership going within the district? How is the three-tiered supports going within the district? And schools are able to identify their strengths and weaknesses and plan for implementation as a result of that. In addition, what we also know is that schools who tend to score higher on the SAM also achieve higher outcomes. And that's really important for us, because what it means is as we see metrics like those on the SAM change over time, we know that our implementation is effective, and we know over time we're going to see a result on student outcomes as well. So as with all of the things that we do, we realize the importance of local context and how that influences implementation. So we provide a lot of flexibility in how districts use this tool. And as a result of that, we've seen two primary ways in which they do so. First, we see that districts or LEAs have decided that all schools, regardless of where they are in terms of readiness or the stage of implementation, are going to use the self-assessment of MTSS. Others, we see that they also are using their own cohort model, and that they're determining that the schools that are most ready, or that the schools that are at a stage where they can use that data effectively, would be the ones that use the SAM. There are advantages to both of those types of implementation, but I bring that up because as we start to look at aggregated data across the state, just know that those data are aggregated from schools that are in very different stages of implementation of MTSS. So before we actually go into how schools are implementing and how they're performing along the critical components, I think that it's important to look just at the usage of the tool. How is this scaling up across the state? And our primary unit of implementation at the state level has historically been the district. So this gives us a sense of the work that we're supporting the district with. How does that translate into the schools? And then how are they implementing and using the self-assessment of MTSS? So we can see in 2015, 2016, we had 179 schools that used the SAM that year. That represents 6.9% of all public schools, including charter schools. In 2016-17, you'll see that there's a large leap in terms of the scaling across the state and the use of this tool. That corresponds with cohorts 3 and 4 coming on board. So we see that as that occurred, we had almost 25% of schools across the state using this tool, and then we saw a modest increase from 16-17 to 17-18. I expect there to be another large leap this year. I would anticipate that we're going to be around a third of schools that are using this tool, that they have decided optionally that this is something that informs their implementation as a result of a couple things. One, bringing cohort 5 in, having more charter schools that would be using the tool. In addition to that, Amy talked about the integration of MTSS and PBIS. PBIS previously had an implementation tool called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. What we saw as we integrated this work, we also needed to integrate our data systems. So we actually are doing some research right now to validate the self-assessment of MTSS to integrate the tiered fidelity inventory as well. So districts or schools would be completing one tool instead of two tools, but receiving the value add and the data from both of those. So I do anticipate a pretty big jump this year as a result of that. I just wanted to also show what the saturation looked like across regions. We see that we range from about 21% in the western region to about 75% of LEAs in the southwest region that have schools that are using the SAM. That's really basically a function of where the LEAs are in the cohort process. But one thing that I think is these data are really important to share is that as a function of time, as LEAs are involved with MTSS implementation for a longer period of time, we see that more schools are electing to use the SAM. So in cohorts 1 and 2, we have 56% of our LEAs that have a school that are using the SAM, whereas in 3 and 4 we have 27%. I would expect, just as the cohorts 1 and 2 have increased pretty substantially over time, we will see that same increase with 3 and 4 as well. So as implementation becomes more mature, they are finding that this is a valuable tool to guide their implementation. And what we have here are comparable aggregate results across the state. And these data are comparable because this is the same sample of schools from 2016 to 2017. Oftentimes, what you see at about this time of implementation and what's referred to as an implementation dip, you see things stall. You see things kind of hold up for a little bit. What we were really enthusiastic is from 16, 17 to 17, 18, we saw increases in implementation of all of the critical components across this school level tool. What I also find compelling about these data are the critical components that are consistently the highest. Communication and collaboration, 3-tiered instructional intervention model, is where we have really focused a lot of our professional learning efforts to date. And so it's helping me start to make a causal link between what's happening with our professional learning and what's happening with implementation across the state. Another thing that I find to be pretty important as well is we saw our greatest leap in leadership this past year. So we saw almost 10 percentage points increases in that. So again, as a function of time, what we're seeing is school-based administrators are finding that this is a valuable framework for school improvement, and they're showing the leadership that's required to do this work well. What we know is that people don't change their attitudes and beliefs until they start seeing positive impacts on kids. So we think that administrators are seeing these positive impacts, and it's impacting our implementation scores here. These are just statewide aggregate results. These are the same sample from 16, 17 to 17, 18. These are all of the data that we have aggregated for the 17, 18 year. I do note that data evaluation is currently our lowest, and that again informs our implementation. I'm currently working with our professional development team, focused on some additional professional development around how we can use both our implementation and outcome data to improve implementation. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brianne from Allegheny County, and she is going to share their story of implementation at the local level.
Welcome, and thanks for coming down the mountain. And
yes,
go ahead, we can get you back.
I'm excited to be here and share a little of our story with you. I could keep you for a very long time, but I will keep it brief and share some of our highlights. I'd like to start by saying that I consider it a privilege to be an educator in the great state of North Carolina. And I am honored and humbled to have this opportunity to share on behalf of our district. I have several members of our district MTSS team with us here today. Melissa Fitzgerald, our EC and Student Services Director, Mary Beth Beasley and Steve Hall, our school administrators, and Chad Beasley, our superintendent. These individuals have been a tremendous support and continue to be a tremendous support in our implementation. I think I can speak for them and say that we credit the incredible work that's happening in our district to staff and team members who have been willing to engage in shared learning, critical conversations, and collaboration. Just to tell you a little bit about Allegheny County, we are in the beautiful mountains of North Carolina. We are a very small rural district. We have 3 pre-K through 8th grade schools and one traditional high school. Our total student enrollment is around 1,450 students, and we have a significant number of students who are economically disadvantaged. We were part of cohort 3 that they were just referring to. Research is clear that educator beliefs about the systems that they work within and the students they work with has a profound impact on student achievement. So as we looked at installing an MTSS framework, we knew we had to begin by examining our beliefs and practices. We used some of the tools provided by the IABS division to do this, including the SAM, or Self-Assessment of MTSS Implementation, and the MTSS Belief Survey, as well as other guidance documents. We used the data from those tools to identify successes that we could scale up and spread across our schools and district. But we also had to acknowledge that there were some deep-rooted beliefs that laid the foundation for ineffective practices that did not support learning for all of our students. We recognized that if we were going to move our students, that we were going to support improved outcomes, we had to shift beliefs, and we had to make changes to some of our practices. The readiness work of our district team was instrumental in establishing common language and understanding of the MTSS framework. We came to understand that the MTSS framework is about total school improvement to maximize growth for all students. It became our methodology. In other words, it's the way we're going to do school. It was our focus. It was the way we were going to organize our work. We believe that an MTSS framework that focuses on the areas of academics, behavior, attendance, and social emotional learning that leads into mental health is how you go about supporting the whole child. It's not about disconnected efforts and competing initiatives, but rather it's about aligning best practices and weaving them together in such a way that we are connecting all of our students to effective supports and all of our staff to efficient systems. Our vision for implementation has been to allow our learning to precede our implementation. And we wanted to make sure that the system that we built was sustainable. So we've been very strategic and comprehensive in our approach. But most importantly, our vision for implementation has been driven by our collective belief that all students should have equitable access to high-quality instruction and supports that match their unique needs. As I said earlier, we recognized that our adult practices, or the implementation, what adults do, is directly related to student outcomes. So as a district, we worked toward ensuring that the systems that we had in place to support adult practices aligned with our MTSS framework. One way that we did this was by creating a district-wide professional development plan goal using our SAM to create a goal that focused on core academic and behavior instruction. We also developed an observation tool designed to evaluate evidence of engaging research-based instructional practices across all content areas and grade levels. And all of our schools began using the NC STAR School Improvement Planning tool and included school improvement plan goals directly related to their implementation of MTSS. We've also provided professional development along with ongoing support and coaching to develop teacher leadership and support collective efficacy. As we've examined our system practices, our urgency was around the need to develop and support core instruction. A major focus for our district has been to ensure that across all content areas, all students receive high-quality core instruction that is standards-aligned, engaging, research-based, and reflective of student need. We want to capitalize on every single moment of instruction that we have with our students. And this has led us to examine our use of technology, our use of testing, and ensure that it is purposeful and it is used to drive the instructional practices that we have. Essential to our focus on academics has been establishing strong literacy and math supports, as we know that these skills are crucial independently, but that they also are foundational to the success of students in other content areas as well as their lifelong learning. Likewise, our district has engaged in the work of establishing core behavior supports in all of our schools. 3 of our 4 schools are now implementing PBIS, and I'm seeing some really interesting work happening in our district with the alignment of character education and development and core behavior supports. Research has clearly demonstrated a connection between attendance and student outcomes, and we appreciate the leadership of the state board in adopting policy around chronic absenteeism. And this year, Allegheny County Schools launched our first ever attendance awareness campaign. In partnership with civic community and our government agencies, we work toward educating students and their families about the importance of daily attendance and the risks associated with chronic absenteeism. We've adjusted our attendance practices to more closely monitor and identify students who may be at risk due to chronic absenteeism, and we've added regular recognition of students who have demonstrated excellent attendance. Our school board and superintendent signed a call to action along with Attendance Works, who's a national nonprofit, committing to our focus to support and raise awareness about the importance of chronic absenteeism and its effects on students. We understand the importance of supporting the development of students' social emotional learning, as it is vital to students' development and overall mental health. Our district has adopted a curriculum which is aligned to social emotional competencies as part of our core supports. We've developed a district mental health team and a comprehensive mental health implementation plan. We are also integrating mental health and social emotional learning with our school level behavior teams. I've had the opportunity to participate in the regional mental health initiative as well as state mental health initiative meetings. We've also, as a district, adopted this whole child resolution, as well as participate in the Sandy Hook Promise programs such as Say Hello, to help create an inclusive environment that supports the social emotional learning development of our students. As we progress in the implementation of our MTSS framework, we want to continue to focus on total school improvement through problem solving and further strengthen our core while building an effective intervention system. Sorry. Our partnership with the IABS division has afforded our district many opportunities for connections both regionally and statewide through a variety of professional development and networking sessions, and even through the use, a very creative use of social media. Not only have they provided us with connections within our region, and I feel like I've got just a tremendous wealth of connections within our region, but on several occasions there's been times when we've needed information or resources or connections, just a person that maybe wasn't within the IABS division or within the work of MTSS. And I've reached out to my regional consultant and said, you know, I need this. And they've connected me to other division contacts within the Department of Public Instruction. And I have to say, I feel by doing that, they have really modeled the same kind of collaboration that we're trying to do in our district, to not be departmentalized and working in silos, but to just really be a network that's all about just doing what's right, and it doesn't matter whose lane it's in. It's about doing what's right for students. And so I really appreciate the connections that they've provided us. I also know that the resources they've provided us. There's a live binder with just a bank of more documents than I could probably ever get to, and school and district modules. We are, as I said in the beginning, we're a very small LEA. To be honest, the research and the resources that they've connected us to, I feel like has really just helped provide equity for us. We may not have had access to some of those things otherwise. We've had free access to those things that we wouldn't have had otherwise. As I said in the beginning, the efforts of dedicated team members in Allegheny County Schools have been instrumental in our implementation of an MTSS framework. But our efforts have been matched by an equally dedicated IABS division. In particular, our regional consultant, Beth Rice, has been amazing. We consider her just an extension of our Allegheny team. We've adopted her. I'll kind of wrap up here and say, to be very honest, the work of MTSS to create a framework to support total school improvement, to maximize growth for every single student, to focus on academics, behavior, attendance, and social emotional learning, as well as mental health, in an aligned, integrated, efficient, and effective way. It is difficult and challenging work. But we believe that it is what's right, and it is what's best for students, and it is the work that they deserve. We are very much still on our implementation journey in Allegheny County Schools, but we are beginning to see the dividends of that work. In the 2017-2018 school year, we saw academic gains in all of our schools, including an increased graduation rate at our high school, an increase in our proficiency rates, as well as an increased growth in our schools. In fact, we went from 3 of our schools not meeting growth to 2 of our schools meeting growth and 2 of our schools exceeding growth. Again, to put that in perspective, we have 4 schools. We went from 75% of our schools not meeting growth to 100% of our schools meeting or exceeding growth. I genuinely appreciate this opportunity to share some of the important work that we're doing in Allegheny County for our wonderful students. I wanted to bring you a little bit of Allegheny County. I brought some gift bags with some samples of our Allegheny, and I invite you anytime to come and visit our schools and our beautiful community. We welcome you, and I thank you for your time.
We did want to leave you with just some feedback from a recent presentation. You have that in the PowerPoint of just these are implementers. Actually, these were school psychologists, and I don't have that background, but to please our school psychologist community is a lot of work. So you can see, because they're so brilliant what they do, but want to open it for any questions or comments regarding state level work or district level work they might have.
Board members?
I love the process. I love the process. I'm reluctant to say it, but I'd love to see the overlay of that in the CNA process that we talked about earlier and how the two could overlap. And I love this.
Dr. Jablonski, if you want to say a word about the way the CNA and
Yeah, and actually I'm probably going to bring Matt back up because Matt has been leading the work at the agency to look at overall assessments and where those overlay. So he's been leading that work. I'm glad that you're here, Matt.
Yeah. So that same thought came to our mind as well, is there seem to be a number of kind of systems level needs assessments out there. And so currently we're in the process of working with some folks. So Susan is on that team, Dan Tetro is on that team, a couple others who are kind of business owners of one of these needs assessments. And we're currently in the process of finding where there are redundancies on those tools, where we're measuring the same things, and how each one of those adds unique value to the others, and how we can coherently explain how to develop a strong district or school-wide implementation plan based on the convergence of data sources. So that process is in the works right now to become, again, like we've said this whole time, more efficient and more effective in the work that we're doing.
Ms. White?
Those catch words I wrote down: aligned, integrated, efficient, and effective. Great rubric there for measurement. And I have to say, I would add passion to the list. We've talked about leadership in every capacity, but it is clear that you are passionate about the work and what this model has brought to Allegheny County. So we commend you on the role that you assumed. You could have looked for easier options if it were, but thank you, and thank you for the passion that you bring to the table.
I appreciate that, but I would deflect that to my team.
That's another good trait of leadership.
Ms. Godwin?
I just wanted to say, I had the privilege of meeting Brianne last year during my North Carolina Teacher of the Year travels, and sat in on several PD sessions that she did, and just was so inspired by her. We ended up having dinner, and we talked about MTSS. My district is now in its first year of implementation, and I have her on social media as a hookup, and I follow her daily. And you're exactly right. The passion is there, and she knows what she's talking about. And so I just want to thank you for coming and sharing your wisdom with the board. And I hope that everybody can become as passionate about it as you are. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Brianne, thank you very much again for coming down from the high country. Members of the Allegheny leadership team, thank you very much for being here. We wish you safe travels back, but you all know how to drive in this stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, Mr.
Follow us on Twitter.
Haas.
You'll get lots of info there. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, members, I misspoke a little earlier. I meant to say we're going to go to the Career and College Ready Graduate Program next. So 4A will be next. We'll go back up to the other one, and we will get Dr. Shaw Coltrane, I believe, and Dr. Hall coming back for this one. I think I keep giving Sneha an honorary doctorate, by the way. But I don't have powers to grant that. You got to bring the UNC General Administration guy back.
Well, good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be back before you today and to talk about a lot of the collaboration and ongoing work that we have with our partners at the community college system. You've probably heard in the past a lot of the work that's been taking place around the college and career ready graduate component. This is based on legislation that has been in place for a few years now. And what I would like to do to kind of kick us off on kind of grounding us in the legislation and the work that's taken place the last few years is to bring up my colleague, Dr. Lisa Chapman from the community college system.
Welcome, Dr. Chapman.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I can't believe that the schedule meant that we have to follow her. Because passion is right. And part of what I heard is doing the right thing is always the right thing to do. Those are the kinds of folks that I love hearing about. And I will tell you, I have been at the system office now for about 4.5 years. And that has given me the great pleasure of representing North Carolina at a lot of national meetings. And one of the things that I know is I also love calling North Carolina home because you all get to spend a whole lot of time working through challenges. But I'm going to tell you, we have more of the right ingredients in North Carolina than any other state does. We got to keep working on aligning them, and in fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So we don't have them all in the right place yet, and we're not putting them together as well as we could. So there's plenty of work to do, but we have more of the right pieces than any other state does. I'm very confident in saying that. So thank you for your commitment to helping us to continue that work. And Dr. Hall is right. We do have an excellent partnership, and I would give Sneha an honorary doctorate as well for all the work that she's done with folks that are part of the system office. We have partnered closely together in a lot of ventures, and this has been another venture that was kind of brought to us in a different sort of way. back in 2015, am I supposed to be doing this? Oh, sorry. Oops. Back in 2015, in fact, September 30th, 2015, there was legislation that said we would work on career and college graduate readiness. And basically what that legislation said was that we would take the community college Dev Ed, hand it to the high schools, and have the high schools teach that Dev Ed and decide what constituted requirement to participate and what constituted successful completion for readiness, and then to continue to report on the effectiveness of that. The difficulty was that was September 30th, 2015, and it was to be implemented statewide the next fall. And you guys know that's going to present a lot of challenges, especially as someone who worked a long time with our local, our LEA, and they were already developing their schedules for the next year. So we did have lots of conversations with our legislators, and worked as a team to ask for some modifications to the rollout. And that's sort of what you see. We've gone back a couple of times with the support of the legislature to really work to implement this in the best possible way for student success. Because while there is legislation that we all know we're responsible for addressing and meeting the requirements of, the most significant thing there, it's about student success, right? It's about students. You talked about aligning. I am an avid believer in students getting credit when credit is due. And when students are taking AP classes and they're getting the scores on those AP tests, they need to have credit for that. I think it needs to be pathway driven. We don't want students taking classes that only count as electives. So we really want students to have the right information to get on the path that they need for success. And that's the way we view this legislation. And so we've moved forward a little bit in different phases to try to ensure that we are meeting the needs of the students at the same time that we're recognizing how some things have changed since the legislation was enacted. So for example, the reason that we didn't simply say, let's use the Dev Ed that the community college system has, is we'd been working on that for a few years, and we had improved on it greatly, but we knew it wasn't right yet because we were looking at the data. We'd helped a lot of students, but we'd not helped all of the students that we needed to. And so if we were not comfortable with it being right yet, it didn't make sense to give it to our colleagues who were very versed in how to teach these students and tell them it's not quite right, but you all take it and help the students with it. So we have been working on that. There's a revision to, our continued revision to our Dev Ed is called RISE, Reinforced Instruction for Student Excellence, and we're moving into a co-requisite model. And so as we have moved that along, and as we have worked with this legislation, we are continuing to ensure that everything we are doing in a partnership is aligned. And so that's why you see the phased approach that we're calling the rollout for, and I call it surge. I realize that that's probably not the best pronunciation, but it was easier for me to remember, and I was thinking about students surging forward because we want to align and accelerate their efforts when those efforts are working for them. The other thing that we did with this that leads to these phases, and then I'm going to step back and let Dr. Hall talk with you just a little bit, is we really believed in our partnership, and so instead of independently developing something, we wanted to work together, and we wanted to start where we knew there were strong partnerships to begin with. And so when you look at that phase approach, you see that it is optional with a certain number of colleges, optional with a certain number of colleges and high school partnerships. We went to those partnerships that we knew were already strong, were already thinking about how they were helping students to be better prepared to transition, and asked them to develop some models. And do some assessment on those models and bring that information back to us so we could end up with the best approach for the state.
So where we are right now, and when we look at the timeline that's in legislation, we have some work ahead of us in the second half of this school year to really prepare our educators and our local districts for implementation hand in hand with the community college system. So one of the ways that we want to approach that professional development to get ready for full implementation over the next 2 years statewide is to start with our district leadership teams. How do we work with them to support this work at the local level? How do we also work with our school counselors? Because obviously there's going to be some information that we have to get in their hands so that they know how to best identify the students for placement into these opportunities for 12th grade coursework. And then looking at our teacher leaders so that they in turn can help support multiple teachers across their LEAs. But we also know that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is how do we sustain this professional development long term? And so with the work with the community college system, how do we have these digital platforms that are out there so that teachers and educators locally can continue to access that information for effective long-term implementation? Because we know that unfortunately we do have turnover from time to time, and we want new educators to know how to access this information and how to effectively implement the work that we want to see on behalf of our students. So the current plan for student eligibility, and this really comes out of it, I believe, the research that the community college system has been doing with the students that are entering and in need of some of this developmental education coursework. Looking at students that have a GPA of anywhere between 2.2 and 2.8, students over and below that would not be eligible for this type of specialized curriculum and integration into a course. Other measures to show readiness, be exempt, would include ACT or SAT scores, the exam scores that you see on screen here, and then looking at some of our comprehensive innovative high school students and the additional pathways that we consider there. Is there anything you would want to add to that?
No, well, no, but yet I'm talking, right? I think the one thing that I would remind you as we look at this, so we're trying to ensure that this is data informed. So we're asking those models that are out there to help us with the data that they're collecting. We also have this legislation was modeled a bit after a program called Tennessee Sales. Some of you may have heard of that. It's not quite the same, but we took a team to visit Chattanooga State and some of the colleges and the LEA partnerships that had worked closely with that to look at what shows us the best kinds of benchmarks for readiness, and you see that we have added, our suggestion will be a floor. There's not a floor if you look in the legislation, but we're talking about one semester, right? And we need to be realistic about what can be accomplished and what we expose those students to and what path they're already in that's helping them. So we did see that in the other models that we were looking at, and the GPA matches the data that we found not only in terms of a program like SAILS, but other states and what they're doing with the co-requisite work and the gains they have made tremendously, and especially when you look at the demographics, it's not. It is clear that a number of populations are being supported by a co-requisite model, and that's the great place, the sweet spot for them to start. The other thing that I would just say about all of these is that we have shifted from requiring students to meet this and this and this and this. We're looking for indicators of readiness, and if you have one of those indicators of readiness, we're trusting that with the supports that you need, that she was mentioning, that we're going to be able to assist you in continuing to move forward. So all of those will be aligned, again, with everything else we do, so it's not confusing for our students and our parents and all of our folks out of the schools.
So when we look at the content plan, again, there's been significant work that has gone into this, and one of the things that we want to do, of course, is make sure that we're aligned to standards. And with that, we know that our local districts have curriculums, they have things that they're already using to satisfy and meet the state standards that are in place. But we also know there's been a lot of work into building the frameworks and things that help support this based on the work that the community college system has been doing with teachers and educators that have been a part of this discussion on the local level. So what we're looking to do is to be able to take the coursework that's in place for an ELA 4 and a level 4 math course that's in 12th grade, integrate particularly into this a program that I know the community college system has done significant research on and is actually using in many of their campuses, which is the NROC, which is an online platform. It's a nonprofit organization. It's cloud-based, and this is something that we would see being integrated and in there to help support the mastery needed to satisfy the requirements that we want to see for students to have that readiness upon entry into a community college system. The successful completion of the NROC modules would help to reinforce that, and I know NROC is something that you're using already in many of the systems. It's involved in the pilots, and it's being used in other areas as well. And again, with my partner here, since I know she has a long-term history since 2015 in this work, we've been talking through this, and we've been working closely with Sneha and others to really look at how do we bring this work together in a way that supports our educators in the implementation, but also ensures the alignment with standards and also the integration of what we know is critical for our students in that developmental education course. Do you want to say anything more about the NROC system as well?
I didn't even bother to say no this time. What I will tell you about NROC is that that was not something we were using extensively. We had folks using Pearson products, Cengage products. You guys have heard of many of those. And we had a local partnership in Charlotte. Central Piedmont was working with one or two of the high schools in Mecklenburg, and they were using NROC, and were very pleased with the success they were seeing. They didn't have a large number of students engaged because it was voluntary, completely voluntary participation, but what they saw was incredibly successful. The interesting thing is, as he mentioned, it's membership based, so it's a lot less expensive as well. And when I encouraged some of our other folks to look at that, I will tell you that obviously they had developed some curricula around what they were already using. They had biases for that. They weren't thrilled about that consideration, but they are great folks who are willing to go the extra mile. They engaged with the NROC staff, and NROC was developed by educators. It's made up of a membership of teachers. Teachers develop the content, and it was specifically designed to help with readiness for students, college readiness for students. When the high school teachers and the college faculty got together, because we've asked teams of high school teachers and faculties to do the development. This has not been developed on one side of the house or the other. They really fell in love with it, and they see lots of potential for that. And we had one of your folks go on one of the trips to one of the conferences for NROC, because we're seeing potential throughout the education continuum that we can use with that. And again, it is very personalized and mastery based, which is great. And the last thing that then I will say that I think is critical when you think about the alignment, think about the other conversation, is the work that they've already done, some things that we've been using and piloting has been approved by the UNC system for minimum course requirements. So we're ensuring that students are college and career ready.
Finally, as we start to wrap up, just next steps. So right now we're working very closely with the community college system to finalize the plans, for where we go for the second half of this year, particularly in the professional development and fine-tuning some of the content and the integration of all of those components. When we start to move into the professional development, the first cohort going into next year, we would see that these would align with, you heard the discussion around RISE. Those college campuses that are part of the RISE pilot, we would look at the districts that surround those pilot areas so that we're capturing the students that will be feeding into those campuses in year one, and then expand to have all schools across the state fully into this program within 2 years. So 1920 would be year one, 2021 would be the final year, so we would have this fully integrated across the state. And then working out other details about data sharing, accessibility, because we do know that one of the things that has come up is that we know not all schools have online capacity for all students to be able to access. So we have to look at how do we have other options and flexibilities to deliver that kind of content in the event computer access is a challenge. So those are the kind of things that we want to continue to work through hand in hand with the community college system and see what other barriers we can remove and learn from as we go into the first year of full implementation.
Thank you, Dr. Hall and Dr. Chapman. Let me get a few questions and comments. the hour is moving. I will say, this is a pretty significant step for the state. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
every high school. We're talking not waiting till kids get to the community college or the university to do remediation, but finding kids who are not college ready, career ready, and moving them into this step. So getting this right is pretty important. And we're at a stage still with community college system and the department are working through the details on this. So if there are questions, concerns, observations, it would be important to get some of those out right now. And Mr. Duncan?
This is not the most important question, but what are the resources that are called upon for this to implement this? As you said, it's a pretty significant program. It's statewide, and it involves two different parts of our state system for education. How is the implementation going to work from a resource standpoint?
Dr. Hall?
Yes, and I'm probably going to ask Dr. Chapman to help me on this, but there were some early stages of support from the state to help with some of the development. And
Yeah, I might change that a little bit.
so that's why that's why we're partnering on this. But I will tell you, you may recall also in our budget request that we just worked on recently, there is a request in there to help support the NROC system. I think we had 250 to 300,000 in there to help support that. That's what this is directly aligned to. So that's part of the answer, but I think.
What does that rollout look like when we talk statewide?
So the rollout statewide would look at, one, how do we develop the professional development this year to align with the RISE campuses? Again, going back to what we said earlier about how do we work with the districts to support the implementation?
No, but the NROC price tag.
What does it cost? So the price tag was basically about, I think it was going to be $1 million for the entire state. Sneha, do you remember that? No. For the entire state, that included every student, not just public school, but you all were looking at about 300,000, right?
Yeah, and so for seniors, the price that we've been currently given is about 400,000, 300 to 400,000, which would give access to all of our seniors and all of our high schools for the actual digital software, for lack of it's cloud-based, et cetera. Right. So the other resources, to answer your question, Superintendent Duncan, has to deal with actual infrastructure money that potentially may be needed in some of our school districts, which is why we're also trying to look at a paper pencil version, because not all of our school districts and schools and teachers will have access to, are not one-to-one. So that's one issue. And then the other thing is, of course, the teachers that will be needed in the professional development.
If I could ask one second
Please
question.
follow.
There has historically been, try for delicacy here, a little bit of friction between the LEAs and the community colleges with respect to how college ready there were. And the friction has been that the community colleges believed that they weren't as ready as the LEAs believed they were, and that there was, they did not see eye to eye completely on that. You're smiling, so I think you will acknowledge there's at least been conversation about that.
I think you're doing a great job with being delicate.
Yeah. I'm working on delicacy, but how are we working through that tension for the benefit of our students? Because honestly, the tension doesn't matter. What matters is how we benefit our students, and that's what I'm trying to get a handle on, how we're going about that.
You are exactly right, and I should have done a better job of just kind of being transparent about that up front. That's why we didn't start with, here's our curriculum, you all haven't been doing a good job, here's the curriculum you need to teach. Because we didn't believe that. And that's why it's important that we've had high school teachers and community college faculty, the subject matter experts, the English teachers and the math teachers on a voluntary basis. And we've had some grant money that we've been able to use a little bit of, working together to develop the curriculum. So we are doing and why we also worked with partnerships that were already strong and looking at this. I think we will still have the challenge of that because of exactly what you said, but let me tell you what I believe has been the problem as a lifelong educator, but I never taught K-12. It's not about the teaching that was happening as much as we weren't well aligned with the expectations. And this is the opportunity to get that right.
Just a couple quick ones, because we also had the challenge of kids coming out of high school being given an AccuPlacer 3 months later and a score that maybe wasn't fully reflective of their readiness and being put in remediation that they can never get out of. So my assumption is, and just check this, all students between 2.2 and 2.8 have to do this unless there's an exception as noted up here or any other.
Yes.
Okay. And everyone who then passes this is exempt from remediation in the community college system, no questions asked.
For 10 years.
10 years. In the UNC system as well?
So, they'll still have to do their admission for their institution. We're open admission.
Not admission, but in terms of remedial courses at the university.
For their coursework, unless they have something specific there.
So it would be nice to think about how we build them into this conversation, because I would hate a kid to decide he or she's going to State or Fayetteville State or wherever, and all of a sudden they're in a remedial program, even though they passed this college readiness test.
I absolutely agree, and if you look at 2020, starting October 2020, we have to begin to report on not only how the students are doing in their gateway classes at the community college, but also in their gateway classes at UNC system, the publics. So that's why we approached, in fact, we went to those provosts back in the summer of 2017 with the course that had been developed, the NROC material, and had them take it to their faculty and look at it. The only thing that they could give in terms of a high school course concept was the minimum admission requirements. But we will definitely continue to connect that with the Comprehensive Articulation Agreement. And so, that was revised in 2014, and there's the strong equivalencies for courses, not just for the full package. So we will continue to work through that, and also with our independents.
Last fall, it sounds like some of the equipment issues are still in the negotiation stage, given if we have some schools or districts that are going to have trouble getting all their kids online, if NROC's fully online, there may be some ways to bridge until we're fully there.
Absolutely. We will absolutely do that. The one I will tell you, and I didn't want to not include, in the last session, there was some funding given to the community colleges to develop the professional development. Mm-hmm. So nothing to begin with, but certainly we did have some with the last funding for that.
Well, it would be nice to think that given the cost we ought to save you on remediation and the faculty that are teaching that right now, maybe some of that flows into the $400,000 that we're going to use to teach the classes at our level.
From us, is that what you're saying? I didn't answer that one, did I?
All right. Board members, any other questions? Dr. Chapman, we appreciate your being here very much, appreciate the explanation. We also appreciate the spirit of partnership in getting this right. As you said, the right thing to do is the right thing to do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
JB, editorial comment. The
All right, you're going to have to ask the chairman's permission on that. I'm getting a message. I'm getting the...
We've just been very fortunate to have great leadership with the community colleges and partnerships, and yes, we've had those bumps in the road. And by the way, Peter Hans is from the mountains of western North Carolina. Therefore, we expect great progress in a very short period of time. So,
I will make sure he knows that.
He knows it. He'll tell you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. You go back to your agenda. We will go back up the end unless you tell me we've got any other guests I need to incorporate. Okay. Very good. So we'll go to SLA 2. This is the report to the General Assembly on local testing. I think we've got Dr. Howard coming up. Board members, I'm going to ask Dr. Howard to make a presentation, and then given that we're talking local testing, I'm going to ask for some very brief comments from Dr. Mason, Dr. Wallace, and if Freeber is not here, Freebird and Lisa, or just Lisa, just about local testing and its use, and then we'll get, this is just a report that is going in. There are no recommendations associated with it, so we're just approving a report. Dr. Howard.
Thank you and good afternoon. Yes, this is a report that is to be provided to the General Assembly. And in this report, which is available on eBoard on page 3, it walks through the specific requirements of the law and the law does require this report, as well as the posting on the NCDPI website of both the statewide testing calendar, if you will, and then also the local benchmark assessments that are utilized by our local school districts. In this report, you will see the statewide program addressed beginning on page 4, and this is information that you're probably very familiar with. On page 4, there are a link, if you will, to the NCDPI website that does have those requirements that is stated in law posted on the website, and both of those are live at this time, so you should be able to access those. This actual report will be posted on the website after it is approved. So moving on to page 9, this is where the report turns to the local testing programs. And so in this hard copy report, we have several graphs and charts for you to see, and it of course addresses all the requirements of the law, which include things such as the number of benchmark assessments, how much those benchmark assessments cost, how long it takes to get the reports back to the teachers, how long it takes to get reports back to the parents, and other details. And all of that is in this report. But we really want to draw your attention to the bottom of page 9 that has a link to the interactive report. So in addition to this hard copy report, in addition to the electronic access to every LEA on the benchmarks that they administer, there is this year an additional interactive report that has a multitude of different charts and graphs that are interactive, meaning you can select the entire state, which is how it's initially presented, and then of course you could go in and select a specific district like Wake County, for example, and see the information for them. And we do just want to note that this interactive report was the result of some work by the UNC Chapel Hill team, student teams achieving results, STAR, that did a study last year looking at how we collected the data in 2017, gave some pointers on how to improve that data collection, and then also to take that data collection and present it in this interactive format that you will see if you go to the NCDPI website. So I did not intend to walk through the particulars of the report. That may be appreciated with the time, but of course, I'm available for any questions.
I think we're fine, and members, it's a comprehensive report if you haven't read it already. A lot of good information about how local assessment is being used. If I could just get a couple of comments from our State Board Advisor, starting with you, Dr. Mason. So as folks walk through the report, a little context about local assessment.
Well, we all are also aware of the concern about the amount of time spent testing. And when I looked at this report, one of the things that I saw and that I've spoken about with my colleagues is just that when you see a report like this that gives it an aggregate and it's charts and data and things like that, it varies from district to district. And but one thing that has been consistent in my conversations with other superintendents is that our teachers appreciate, although they don't always appreciate the time we do devote to assessments. I think they're all on the same page with us that there's a lot of time spent testing. They appreciate the local assessments that they're able to use for diagnostic purposes, to differentiate instruction. Some of the products that we're using locally, they may be locally designed and developed, or they may be purchased from other vendors. For instance, in my district, we use the MAP assessment, and then that is linked to the Compass, another program that we use, and that can create individualized lessons for the students based on any deficiencies that they have. Ms. Godwin and I were talking earlier about another product similar to that her district is using. Numerous superintendents share with me that whatever the product is or whatever the locally designed item is, that's really the value that we're bringing to the classroom, is that teachers are able to create small groups for instruction as students are moving through the course or the year, and they assess again with those benchmark or formative type assessments. They may reformulate groups based on how the students are progressing or not progressing, and then have a different teacher or bringing in tutors or someone else to work with them in smaller groups than the regular large group instruction. And that is really what we see as the value of the amount of tests that we see depicted in some of these tables that looks like a great deal of local assessment. I would
Sure.
Okay, well, I was telling Mr. Buxton, prior to coming back into the classroom, I was an assistant principal for 5 years. I served in 2 different districts. So I was the testing coordinator. So I was able to see what it really looked like in terms of managing the testing calendar. So I think that as I was looking at this and reading through it, I was excited that we were going to be able to see every district's calendar, testing calendar, with the state testing and the district testing all put out there. So we can kind of get a snapshot of what the different districts are doing, and hopefully cut down on some of the testing for our teachers. But I do agree that localized testing is what drives instruction, because I'm all for the flexibility of local assessments and testing. And it doesn't always have to be a paper pencil test or an interactive test on the computer. It can be project-based learning. It can be many different varieties of testing. That's what I prefer. But I believe that it is important to give the local districts that freedom, that flexibility to be able to do it in a fashion that meets their needs, and can help our teachers be better and effective educators in the classroom.
And not to duplicate the aforementioned, I'm going to try to illustrate the construct of what was just mentioned. When it comes to local testing, it's just like, let's just use athletics for example. It's like a football game or a basketball team. As you start off with practice and you're putting plays in, you're doing what you do. You don't want to just go into the game without practicing what you just did. Mm-hmm. You see, that's what the local assessments do. You actually test them, and you're analyzing the kids and you're assessing the kids to make sure that they've retained their information before you get to the big test. So it's little chunks. So it's extremely needed. Because if we didn't do it as a district, I'm pretty sure teachers will create their own benchmark assessments to make sure they're going to where they're going. The concern with testing is not the local assessment. The concern with testing is I'm looking at this chart, and as the upper echelons of education say, you have a problem of theory and you have a problem of practice. And when you're looking at this, you say the ACT says it's 1 day, and the ACT work keys on this list, it says 1 day. But in practice, it's not 1 day because you have a 4x4 standard that you have to adhere to, meaning it's going to take us 3 days to test the entire grade level. Even though on this little chart that y'all see, it's only 1 day. In reality, it takes 3. I know because we just gave it. And today was the last day, and it took us 3 days. So we're in the library, you're at 4x4, and you got desks in the library to adhere to the standard, if you get what I'm saying. And it gets even worse on the ACT when you take up the whole gym and you displace a whole group of kids to make sure the test is going. That's the concern with testing. It's not local assessments. We need local assessments. We got to have local assessments so we can analyze what we're doing going forward. That's the whole big deal of personalizing learning, and the big F word, formative assessment. That is a form of formative assessment. You got to have that. So, hope I illustrated that concept pretty good. I'm all for local testing.
One more comment.
I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't share a concern that was expressed by other superintendents as well in the discussion, that we understand the need for assessments. We understand the need for some of the assessments, right, and the accountability that goes with that. There was great hope that there may be on the horizon an ability to create better assessments in the future, that provide more information to teachers and to parents in a timely manner. Some superintendents also expressed concern about the length of time, particularly that our younger students are required to take, and the length of those tests, and the lower grades particularly, and for our students with disabilities. Some of the constructs around the way tests are administered is a burden to some of those students, and feels very wrong in the way that we have to administer those. And so there was great optimism that maybe we're moving to a new generation of assessment.
Yeah.
Thank you each for adding your experience and perspective into this. I'm going to suggest that folks take a look at the report. If you have specific questions, Dr. Howard can answer them, but we would move on at this point. Burning. Dr. Howard, why don't you, hold on, why don't you stay right there? Let's do this. We are moving on, but let's go ahead, and since you're at the podium, let's go ahead and do 4C, the innovative assessment.
Okay, and I just need to grab my notes.
Go grab your notes. And so, folks, as you're pulling this item up, this is a December 17th grant deadline that the department is preparing to respond to, federal grant opportunity on assessment pilot. And so we're going to get an update and opportunity for some comment in council. Dr. Howard.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity. It's very timely to follow those comments that were just made. This, of course, is in reference to the Innovative Assessment Pilot, which is offered by the U.S. Department of Education as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's officially referred to as the Innovative Assessment Demonstration Authority. We really, in considering to approach this work and pursue this work, went back to the foundation for the NC check-ins, which really came about through the Task Force on Summative Assessment that was convened by this board. And in fact, as you know, the chair and co-chair were members of this board, Mr. Buddy Collins, who very much was committed to this work, and Dr. Olivia Oxendine as well. So in this report, the recommendation was for the department to study the possibility of implementing a through-grade assessment to serve as a statewide summative assessment. And as we all know, we began with a proof of concept model in 2015-16. We began with 2 grade levels, grade 5 mathematics and grade 6 English language arts reading. That evolved to NC check-ins, which as we do this presentation today, I have approximately 50% of the schools are participating this school year. Yesterday it was qualified for me. It's actually over 50%, and it's over 50% of the students, which is a better way to think about that, not the schools. It did evolve with NC check-ins being an interim with an emphasis on formative, and the success of NC check-ins was exactly what I think we heard in the comments a few minutes ago, and that the information provided was throughout the year, and it was student specific, and we were able to share with the teachers the test books so they could look at the actual item and how a student responded to that item, which does a great job of giving insight into how that student is thinking about that content. So building on the success of NC check-ins and the lessons learned from that, we are, of course, developing an application for the demonstration authority. It is due December 17th. It is for 60 months, and so that's 5 years. And year 1 of the pilot would be the 2019-20 school year, which would be a planning year. And the intention of the work here is, before I get into describing what it actually looks like, I just have to stress, and this is on your slides as well, that we have to continue to meet federal law. And that is a very important point to make, because I think sometimes when we talk about flexibility or innovative or new ways to do things, then we think the opportunity may be to not have to fulfill federal law. And these are some of the key components of that federal law that we must adhere to, and that this innovative pilot does in no way excuse North Carolina from. We have to continue assessing students on grade level content standards. That means all students, including those that would participate in this innovative pilot. It's very strongly stated that we have to hold all students and subgroup of students to the same challenging academic content standards, and we must report an academic achievement level, which is our levels 1 through 5 for each individual student. We must assess all students in the non-participating schools on the statewide academic assessments. And really and truly, the way this is structured, we actually do not get to a point to where those participating in the innovative pilot would not have to take the end of grade assessment until year 4. Because it has to be built up over time, and the assessment that we build through the innovative pilot, it can only be used for accountability once it meets all of the requirements of federal law. So it cannot be used prior to then. So the other requirements is, of course, that we have to break up within a grade span, the participation. So the intention here is not to have the innovative pilot at grades 3 through 5, because what that would mean is in a said school, those students would not possibly at some point also have the end of grade during their grades 3 through 5 span. So the design is just to make sure that we're implementing it slowly over time. And this last bullet is one that gets our attention, is that we must have a separate sample of schools to take both the pilot assessment and the statewide assessment to study comparability. So really that can be accomplished in the design across the years 2, 3, and 4. So it's not quite as painful as it sounds, but it does require that there are some students who do both. And that is because, again, with federal law, the requirement for comparability is very strongly stated. So we're not developing a new assessment that completely forgets what we're doing. Think about it as we're developing an innovative assessment that maintains the current expectations for rigor and expectations for students with respect to those challenging content standards and with respect to our academic achievement standards, which are the levels 1 through 5. And so this work is a process in making sure that that is accomplished. So the actual design is going back to the task force. It is exactly what the task force recommended. And it is a through grade assessment model. And so what that means is there would be 3 administrations during the school year, just like with the NC check-ins. And as we learned with NC check-ins, we really are benefiting from the experience with NC check-ins in this design. What we learned, of course, is that English language arts, the content standards are spiraled. And so really the assessments are measuring the same content every administration, but the complexity of the reading text increases over time. Mathematics is a little bit different because mathematics is, of course, specific content standards that are taught all throughout the school year. And what we do with that is we do convene teacher panels who come in, and they did this with NC check-ins, and we would go through this process again if we were to be afforded this opportunity. Teachers come in and we say to them, okay, the first administration is going to be the 2nd week in October or after 9 weeks of instruction. Which content standards should we be assessing for that administration? So we would go through all of that process again. We do have multiple choice items. One thing I should mention is for some of our mathematics assessments, we do have technology enhanced items. We have gridded items. So just to remember that it's not 100% multiple choice, but it's also not different than the items that we already have, is the point that we're really trying to make here. So the rationale is to build on the work that we did with NC check-ins, and the intent is to have instructional support for students throughout the school year, which I think is the comment I just heard, to give immediate feedback on student performance. This would require, though, the combining of the results from those 3 interim assessments into one achievement level. And that is very important to remember because that is really much of the crux of the hard work that is necessary to do this. And one of the things that we always say is if this was easy to do, if it was simple work, then everyone would be doing it. I do think we have not necessarily an advantage, but we have an opportunity to build on what we learned from NC check-ins. But we just have to note that the requirement is ultimately if those assessments were to replace the end of grade, then we have to be able to provide an achievement level, and it has to be comprised of the breadth and depth of all the content standards, so all 3 administrations. You know, talking about testing time is always something that we all are trying to hope one day to get to. The requirement to assess the breadth and depth of the content standards, and to do that in a reliable way drives the number of items, and the number of items drives the length of the test. So in this opportunity, it would be 3 shorter testing experiences from the statewide assessment. But if you added them together, I would never say that overall it would be necessarily shorter. But I think going back to the developmental appropriateness, I think someone made the comment, particularly the younger children, grades 3 through 5, and they're sitting for a very long end of grade assessment, this would break that up. One of the discussions that we often hear is the number of reading selections that are on the end of grade, particularly for those grades 3 through 5 students, and the fatigue factor that may be contributing to their performance on the assessment. Now, I can say that we've done statistical analysis and we have determined that there is not a fatigue factor at the end of the test, but I can also acknowledge that that does not provide any comfort or really assurance to any teacher who observes that in her students or any parent who hears that from her child. So we deeply acknowledge that. But this would be an opportunity for shorter administration times. We really think this would be helpful in the English Language Arts reading assessments as well as the mathematics. What the intention in this design is to do is for each one of those interim through grade assessments, we'll have the opportunity to have more items per content standard. We currently do not report content standard level information for students. And that is why we get the feedback from the field that the information from the test doesn't really help them. They don't know what a student did well in and what a student did not do well in because they're not getting this content standard information. Having the test broken up across 3 will give us the opportunity to have more items per content standard. We need at least 5. We would like to have 6. But we need at least 5 statistically, and then we can provide this content standard information. One of the feedback that we're hearing, and we're not surprised, and this has been internally in our conversation, and I think we may have even shared it with you from time to time, is the NC check-ins provides those test books back to the teachers. And with this kind of model that is used for accountability, of course, security comes back in to be a priority. And so with the capacity and the depth of the item pool, we just don't feel like we could build the assessments to where we have new items every year, which is what we would have to do. But even if we could do that, with NC check-ins and with our state assessments, you know, they really start being administered about the 2nd week of May, maybe to a small population, but somebody out there is testing the 2nd week of May, and it does not end until June 10th. So the exposure of those items over time, even through this model, would open the door to possible security issues. And security, just so we all know, is one of the elements that we have to provide evidence to the U.S. Department of Education through the peer review process for assessments that we are attending to. They consider that a very important detail that we have to acknowledge. So one other thing is I must share that when we started having this conversation in early November, I believe it was, that we were going to submit this application, Dr. Hall and I discussed, and I said, really, you know, we prefer to do English language arts because, quite frankly, English language arts is the one that might have the best fit. Our psychometricians contributed to that conversation, and they said to me, they said, well, you know, the thing is, if you do ELA and it does really, really, really well, then our stakeholders are not going to have any patience for us trying to figure out how to do math. And so they said we really should do both. And so what we're looking at now is starting in year 2 with grade 4 mathematics and grade 7 English language arts reading. And then in year 3, similar to what we did with NC check-ins, we would add a grade level. We would add reading at grade 5 and mathematics at grade 6. We're purposely trying to stay away from grade 3 as we have been because of Read to Achieve. And with grade 8 mathematics, of course, we now have the complication of we're no longer double testing, and some students are taking NC Math 1 and some students are taking grade 8 math. So we kind of just want to leave that over to the side. But that would give us 2 years, and we would expand out that 3rd year to another grade level that we can do all the analyses and all the studying that has to be done to be able to, at the end of the 3rd year, go to our standard setting process, which is when we set achievement levels. And then in the 4th year is when those participating students would only have to take 1 assessment. Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure we get to questions before.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
let me actually
ahead.
take a few right now, and then
Sure.
we'll finish up. Questions about, not the grant so much, but the approach that we're taking in this. Ms. Wilby?
3 questions. I'll just put them out there, and you can respond now or tell me later. But 1, does this have to be multiple choice? Is there an option to have some performance-based assessment if we're talking about innovative assessment? 2, if it has to be multiple choice, I'm going to pull a throwback Wednesday, Mr. McDevitt, and say, why can't we embed questions rather than have a separate test? That was one of my early and often used questions when I first joined this board. And third, were you all a part of the survey that the superintendent just sent out that I got a copy of? Somehow it was directed to parents and caregivers, and I don't have a child in public schools any longer, but I did get a copy of that survey entitled Too Much Testing. Were you all a part of that survey, and how did that play into any of the decisions here? So those are my three questions for now or later.
Okay.
So the first one, performance items, I think that is some of the feedback that we are receiving from the groups that we have talked to. You know, the innovation of having different item types. I would say the door isn't closing on having innovative item types. I would say doing this application at this point in time, we know that we know the kind of items that we have, that we can confidently say to the U.S. Department of Education, we can do this. We would never close the door to another type of items. We have to remember those items cost a great deal of money in scoring, but not only that, even more so, in North Carolina, we have immediate score reporting in our schools. They assess today, they get those results tomorrow, with the exception of English 2. Right. And we always field a fair number of emails protesting English 2.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's a consideration there. And then the embedding, just to stress, we will be using embedding to field test the items. But with this innovative assessment pilot, the way it functions is you would build this innovative assessment and then administer it. So yes, we'll be using embedding, but at some point in time, year 2, as we have it mapped out now, we have to administer the actual assessment, because that's the only way we're going to get to knowing if it's comparable to the end of grade. The survey. I didn't answer the survey. You want to answer the survey? Either way.
So to answer your question, that was something I would encourage the board to have a conversation with the state superintendent.
Well, I would do that today.
No, I agree, but I think we were not directly involved in the crafting of that, so that's why I would encourage conversation between the board and the state superintendent regarding that.
Okay. Mr. McDevitt?
Yes. You know, as it relates to assessments, as much as we've all struggled, we've never gotten it right, and I don't know that we ever will, but the struggle needs to continue, and I thank you for doing that. But a lot of good comments made here, including authentic testing, project-based learning and how to do that, and graduation projects that we were forbidden, as you know, by statute to require. I mean, we could go on and on, where we've tried to innovative things over the years, and I appreciate you doing that. I think also it's not just the difficulty with assessments, and we're struggling to figure out time and age-appropriate testing, but it's also over the years been what we do with them. And you know, one of the things that I think is labeling a school an A through F school associated with test scores is just not a good thing to do. And I know you don't have any control over that, but I do know that the commentary on approving our ESSA plan was commending the state for that particular component out of U.S. Department of Education. My question to you is, as I recall, we abandoned the innovative approach that you and Buddy Collins and others were so instrumental in doing, because the legislature intervened in some manner that was associated with the ESSA plan. So I've had some conversations in the last 48 hours that made me believe that that there might be some statutory change that you might have to take a look at as well. You would know that better than me, but that in order for us to apply, and I know it's due by December 17th, that there might be some statutory changes made associated with the ESSA plan when we were submitting that.
So I'm not recalling all the information, I'm sure, around how we ended up with NC check-ins and not the innovative. my perspective is that NC check-ins just became so successful.
Oh, yeah.
As it was presented, that, yeah, and Mr. Collins would bring up and say, you know, when is this going to replace end of grade? When is this going to replace end of grade?
Yeah.
The way NC check-ins are designed, it's not a swap-out possibility. So we have to go back to the drawing board, learn from NC check-ins. In fact, NC check-ins, we're perceiving would continue parallel to this. The response has been so positive, we would not want to remove that instrument from the field until possibly, you know, I have a long view in life, and, you know, possibly at one point, the feedback would be, well, this new system does such a good job of giving information, we don't need to administer these NC check-ins. And part of the model is to provide non-secure items that are tagged to the content standard so the teachers can have access to those items. As far as the law and ESSA and the requirements, if we think about it, the requirements for two things. One, the requirement in the state law is that we know the percent of students that are proficient, right, level 3 and above, and that is integrated or incorporated or analyzed in the statewide accountability system. The federal law also has that, but if you were to look at this application, the application is in two parts, and the first part is really the state just saying, in its own words, back to the U.S. Department of Education, we will adhere to and maintain and follow federal law. And so federal law is not just that we have to have an achievement level from an assessment. Federal law is back to those requirements. You have to assess all the content standards. You have to have an achievement level. You have to be mindful of students with disabilities.
With a test.
Exactly. It's how the test is developed. Is how the test is developed. So, you know, we have some assessments that are used, our local benchmark tests, for example. They were not developed to be used for federal accountability, for a statewide accountability system. So in this application for this authority, the state has to affirm that it will follow federal law with respect to the development of these assessments and the use of these assessments and accountability. And until that can be met, it cannot be used for the accountability calculation or analysis. So in effect, you know, just to consider, if there was a huge roadblock along the way, I don't think there will be, but in full disclosure, if there were a huge roadblock and we could not take those three assessments and combine them into a valid and reliable academic achievement level for every student in this state, then it's over.
All right, let me summarize a couple things. One, we've got a grant due December 17th. We've got to get it before we can have any more conversation.
Yes.
We've got to have a pilot. Second, there's an opportunity as we walk into this to not only use what we know we can deliver on with NC check-in like interim or benchmark assessments, but the potential of building out performance-based or performance task items, and I'm hearing some support from that on the board. So in future conversations that we build in, it'd be nice to understand what the opportunities and challenges with that may be. And I guess third, we're a little way off from any kind of discussion about how this builds into the accountability model, but that may be a coming attraction if in fact we receive this grant and start moving forward.
And just to clarify, it is not a grant.
Last comment, yeah.
It is not a grant, it is an award, it is an opportunity. It's because it comes with no money.
Right. It comes with the opportunity to use it as a, all right. I'm gonna keep us moving.
I really want to say something.
Right,
When I went on the e-board for the first time to look at our agenda and I saw innovative assessment pilot, I got excited and then I clicked on it. And I wasn't excited because I don't think that we're using the word innovative in the correct way. And I even went and looked up what innovative is in the dictionary, featuring new methods, advanced, original, creative in thinking. That's not multiple choice. It's just not. And we as a board are focusing on personalized learning. We're trying to meet every child where they are in their learning, but yet we're giving them a cookie cutter multiple choice test. I'm sorry, y'all. That hurts my heart. And I can't sit here and not tell you that. And I know y'all, you say, oh, Lisa, she's wearing her heart on a string, and but you're right. I love my kids, and they deserve more than multiple choice. They deserve to be able to show us more than just surface level learning. They've got deep learning inside of them, and they can show us in a multiple variety of ways. You know, project-based learning, personal, you know, the performance-based learning methods. There's lots of different ways to assess these kids, and we have this opportunity, y'all, through ESSA, to break through this barrier that we've set up and do something new and original. I say let's go back to the drawing board and let's try to find something that works for all kids, because a multiple choice test is not the right way for all kids. I'm sorry.
Thank you. If the prior comments and interest in performance-based tasks wasn't strong enough, I think you just got a good testimony to that. Dr. Howard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We've got one last item, Mr. Chair. Course for credit, SLA 3, I believe. Dr. Shaw, Ms. Shaw Coltrane, come on up. This is for discussion, so we will not be voting on this tomorrow. We will do this next month. So we'll do a quick introduction to this, and I think we'll probably not do questions unless there's significant clarifying questions.
Absolutely.
So you do a really good job
I will.
introducing.
Yes.
No
So,
pressure.
in spring 2017, those of you that were with us, I had to bring an item that didn't make any of us necessarily feel good. It was about alignment. You heard Dr. Hall and Dr. Chapman talk about alignment between high school, community college, and university. And as ideal as that sounds, sometimes it's very challenging because we each have different systems. And so one of the things back in spring 2017 I had to bring to you, and you all approved it, was a different way of awarding credit for college courses. If you recall, we realized with CCP having grown so quickly, we need to kind of take a pause and look at the implications, because a typical college course and how they meet a 1-hour college credit course typically meets for about 14 hours of study. And we were awarding that course the same credit on a high school transcript as a traditional year-long course. And then with the weighting changes, an introductory course of 14 to 20 hours of contact would equal the same credit and weighting as advanced manufacturing or AP statistics. So those of you that were here, we all kind of went on the journey together and decided that no, we couldn't award one full high school credit for a one college semester credit course because they're different. They're apples and oranges. So that was slated. That was a year and a half. We put that into place for implementation this past fall. So we gave a year and a half headway so we can make that transition. In that transition, the CTE folks, myself, and others received some feedback, as well as from Dr. Chapman and the community colleges. That was one area we hadn't thought of. And I'm the first to say, okay, we'll bring it on, let's talk about it. Turns out they were particularly some local courses, not on the state articulation agreement, that were inadvertently being affected by this. So what we worked with the field on this past semester before bringing to you, so what we brought to you was clear and concise, was how do you combine some courses that could work together to make the full hour on a high school transcript. And so what we're bringing to you is an addendum to the policy change we made in 17. I also cleaned up some years because the years sound different now, 2 years later. The idea that if you have, for example, a drama course that's one college credit hour and you had two others in the same year, they could be combined to receive credit. They have to be in the same, like 4 letters, right? Drama, welding, whatever the case may be, to be combined. And they have to be based on the official source. So not just what a high school or college says, but what the community college system office actually has on their website to say this course is this kind of credit, because we were having some people say, oh, but there's a lab. Well, the college has already counted that lab as part of the credit. So we wanted to clarify all that, because while we give students all these incredible opportunities, we still need to maintain integrity of systems that are in place, and this is one of them. And so our courses in the curriculum programs, we're now adding, hey, no, if they're taken singularly, still don't receive credit, but if you want to combine them, and so our schools have been doing that actually for the last for this past fall. We've heard only positive feedback from it, and so we feel good about this change we're bringing to you today.
To make sure, any clarifying questions that are particularly important as you're seeing red the changes as you go through. Okay.
Wow, shortest item I've
Okay.
ever done.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton.
My schedule says it's time for lunch.
Slash dinner.
We'll now move to the Healthy Responsible
And my vice chair.
Committee. Ms. Willoughby.
I just lost my vice chair, but thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Keenan and I are leading this Healthy Responsible Student Committee. We have 2 new business items today. We'll begin with the Healthy Active Children Report. You've seen Dr. Essick before providing this report. All school systems are required to submit this data, telling us how they are implementing our Active Children Report. And we should have the PowerPoint up, but I'm going to ask Dr. Essick to go ahead and begin because you do have it on your e-board. There are a lot of slides. She'll go through them quickly. There's a second set of slides with even more information, so I challenge you to please review all the information. Dr. Essick.
Sure. Somebody may want to let me borrow a computer that has it pulled up. I don't know which slides are coming up.
Here comes Les to the rescue.
Okay. Well, I will say thank you, Ms. Willoughby, and good afternoon to all of you.
Here we go.
Okay. Thank you. Got
Good job, Les, though.
Thank you very much. I know you are tired and ready to be out, but I have some important information. I'm going to take a few minutes to share it with you. You do have a detailed report. That's the larger PowerPoint that has all of the information in it. And I'm just going to try to hit some highlights as we go through this afternoon. Just a reminder that we frame all this work in the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And our districts over the last couple of years have really come to embrace this. And they speak this language now, and they work with this model, and they've made that transition from coordinated school health to this model. The policy itself has 7 sections. You can take a look at those, and we'll talk about a little bit of data from each one of those as we move forward. Just some basic highlights. We have 100% of LEAs reporting. This is last year's data, 2017 data, so there are only 115 at that point. 63% of those said their SHACs, and that's their School Health Advisory Council, met at least quarterly. 70% said their SHACs provide annual reports to their Board of Education, just like we're providing to you today. We're really encouraging them to share this information with their boards. And 66% provided staff wellness programs. So
just,
the policy.
Just one clarification. 100% of the LEAs responded, which is great. They're supposed to, but sometimes it takes a lot of effort.
We did a few little begging and pleading, but we got 100%. Yes, thank you.
The other fact that I wanted to point out is charter schools are not required to participate in this, so we may want to think about that as we move forward.
Thank you. So the policy encourages districts to move toward 150 minutes of physical education at the elementary level, taught by certified physical education specialists. And if you look at the right-hand column, 40% of our LEAs say that all of the students in their LEA receive 150 minutes of physical education a week. But if you look over on the left side, 34% say that none of their schools have students who receive 150 minutes a week. So we're really trying to work with them to move up those second 2 bars in the middle and try to move in that direction. At the middle school, whoops, wrong direction. At the middle school level, the policy encourages that schools work toward 225 minutes of healthful living weekly. That is divided equally between health education and physical education. Right now, 43% of our districts say that all of their students get 225 minutes of healthful living per week, where 20% say that none of them do. So, but if you look at those bars, they're a little more even there and moving more in that direction. So we're continually working with our districts to help them find ways to make sure they include 50% health, 50% physical education. We also ask our shacks how often they meet, and if you look at the green, 40% of our districts meet at least 4 times a year, which is great, and 22% meet 5 times or more. So we've got folks that are really interested in this work and trying to see how they can move their districts forward. So we asked their districts to use data to inform their work. 70% of them use the results from the survey they just did to help them inform their work the next year, as they should. We send that back to them. After they send us their data, we send them their report back, so they'll have that. And we'll also be sending them the state level report as well. So they'll have all of their data. 69% of our districts are using the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. 19 of them have been oversampled and have data that's county specific, and they use that, but a lot of them use the state level data as well. There we go. And we're also encouraging our districts to use the North Carolina assessment tool that we have created for our whole school, whole community, whole child pilot districts. That's available to everybody. It uses Youth Risk Behavior Survey data as well as some other types of data. And it allows our districts to see how they're doing compared to state and national data. So that puts them in a better context for their work. So we always ask our districts, what are the areas that you're working on most for your shack? Nutrition this year was number 3. It's usually number 1. It's moved down to number 3 because, as you might expect, number 1 is a safe school environment, and number 2 is, and number 1, just like last year, was mental health. Mental health continues to be a major challenge and a major issue for our districts. And just to kind of give you those focus areas in context, the green line that runs across the screen there starts, number 1 is the area in 2013 that districts said they were most interested in working on, and that was school safety back in 2013. Number 13 is tobacco, so that kind of gives you an eye from 2013. As I overlay 2018, you'll see that, again, mental health went to number 1, school safety is number 2, nutrition number 3, and alcohol and drugs moved up as well. And that may have a lot to do with a lot more information out about the opioid crisis. Also, while tobacco's gone up slightly too, some people may have put that idea of vaping and into the tobacco and alcohol and drugs. So that's part of, I would guess that may have something to do with that. But this is one that I think has really troubled our team, and we're still working on. We asked students in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey if they make mostly A's, B's, C's, and D's, or D's. We also asked them some other questions, and we run that data against that. And the percentage of students that felt sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 or more weeks in a row in the past 12 months, that's a definition of depression. And if you look at 2007 to 2017, for those that make A's, B's, and C's, that went up slightly, but that's still, clearly that's an issue. But the students who said they made mostly D's and F's, that went up significantly. I'm not sure if one causes the other. I'm sure they're related, so we need to do some work and figure out how we can address some of those mental health issues with our students. One way to do that, I know the superintendent's work group is doing some work around standards for mental health training and some policy recommendations, and I know some of that work will probably come back to this board at some point.
Well, and again, if the superintendent were here, we would ask to hear from him a little bit informally about that work group that he has. I would ask Deanna that we ask him to bring specifically any work around that, because that was really geared to, originally to mental health. And so it's, given that last slide, it's very important that we get information about what his work group is doing about that.
So let's look at physical activity for just a moment. The policy requires that all students K through 8 get 30 minutes of physical activity daily, and that's in at least 10-minute increments. At the elementary level, 95% of our districts say that their students are getting that 30 minutes of physical activity. They're mostly getting it through their physical education classes, recess, and through the use of classroom energizers. And we have energizers for free on our website. There's also tons of free resources out there where students can get, classroom teachers can get energizers. At the middle school level, though, that seems to go down just a little bit. 82% of our students are getting 30 minutes of physical activity daily. And they're getting that through physical education and classroom energizers. And what we're trying to work with our districts to understand is that they can still teach their standards in the classroom and get that physical activity at the same time. And if you all will indulge me, I think we'll show you how that might work. I'm going to invite Beverly Vance, our section chief for math and science, to come and help me with this, and we'll show you how you can do this in a science classroom. And I think some of my team will probably stand up because we're going to be asking you to,
Mr. Chair,
to stand if you're able and feel like it. Some of you have been standing because you're tired, so let's get a little more energy.
Wait to see Red.
Are you up for this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I can't.
It might be just what y'all need.
It's the athlete.
Hey, y'all, this is kindergarten. Come on now.
Great. This is great. So, good afternoon. This is supposed to be a lot closer to lunch. You're supposed to be feeling that downward slump now because you've eaten. Instead, you're hungry because you didn't. We're going to do this anyway. So the way this might work at a middle school, so let's say we're going to do this 10 minutes, get that 10 minutes of movement in. I might take the first 5 minutes of my class period and say, we're going to do about can be about 10 energizers for about 30 seconds, okay? And that'll give you about 300 seconds there, and that'll give you about 5 minutes. I think I did the math right on that. And so what would happen, the teacher would write those words on the board. It's aligned to a 6th grade Earth Science standard, and it's about forces in the earth. And what I would ask students to do is about the first 5 minutes of class, I have these on the board, and when they hear the definition of a word, if it defines earthquake, they're going to shake, and Dr. Essex is going to demonstrate. I'm going to give her a little bit of a clue here. If it says volcano, you're going to squat down and jump toward the ceiling. If it's a tornado, if it defines a tornado, you're going to twist. Very good, very good. And if it's a hurricane, she had to have a little formative help on this one, though. If it's a hurricane, you're going to imitate jogging through a strong wind. The wind is pushing you back, okay? So, and you should do that about 30 seconds. So if we did about for 30 seconds of activities, but we're going to cheat a little bit. I was going to ask you to do it about 5 seconds. We might even do about 1 or 2 on these. So I'm going to read the definition. You think about what it might be, and then you perform the activity for about as long as you can handle it. And then I'll say stop, and we'll go on to the next. Are we ready? Yeah. All right, so let's begin. This phenomenon occurs when rock from the Earth's mantle melts and moves up to the surface. Oh, there you go, for about 5 seconds. And we haven't even done 2 seconds yet. Great. Oh, awesome. You can stop now. Very good. Okay. So, I've got people behind me. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is called a funnel until it comes in contact with the ground. A funnel until... Oh, tornado. Awesome. Very good. You guys are the A class. Yes, you are, all of you. Very good. You may stop now. These cause a storm tide, which can increase the mean water level by 15 feet or more. So what are we doing? There you go. Come on. I see some of you cheating. Wait until someone else. Quite all right. It's okay. You can do that. Oh, awesome. Very good. And the final one. You've been waiting for it. These occur along faults or fractures in the Earth's crust. There's only one left. It's an earthquake. Here we go. So we got to shake for about 5 seconds. Very good. You're all awesome. Please thank the person beside you for participating.
What's her name? No.
Thank you all for being such good sports. And thank you, Beverly.
Come back here. This chair is crazy. It's lopsided
So, did you have fun
sideways.
for a few minutes?
We needed that.
I mean, imagine when we, and that, we should incorporate enough of that. Those, again, 30 seconds each. And when you finish, students would have had some vigorous activity for 10 minutes. So it's a really good way to teach that lesson and still incorporate that physical activity. So on with a few other data points. Recess. The policy states that no teachers to withhold recess as a form of punishment or to keep students in to make up work. If you look at 2017, it was a little bit lower, and districts told us they were working on that, and so it went back up in 2018. It is still an area that we're really trying to support our LEAs with, is trying to help them come up with strategies to make sure they get the work done without keeping students in for recess. Community involvement. We ask our districts if they are sharing their building. Does the community use their building? 98% of them have shared use agreements, either formal written agreements or informal agreements. And I think if we think of, bless you, and I think if we think about the hurricanes and the tornadoes and the things that have happened in our communities, it's incredibly important that we look at this number, because it means those are the hubs. Those school buildings are the hub of so much of the community life, and so that's why it's so important that we get those schools back functioning. So who receives this report? The superintendent receives the report, local board of ed, but we're encouraging our districts, hopefully those numbers will go up next year, to make sure their local board of health, their county commissioners, and the community get the data. When community hear about the data, then they get more engaged and more involved. So we're really trying to move that along. On this one, I'm going to try to channel Dr. Lynn Harvey, who wasn't able to be here today, and I'll give you a little bit of information. You have a ton of information on local wellness policies in the larger report, but just a few highlights from those. First of all, if a school district or an LEA receives nutrition funding, federal nutrition funding, they must have a local wellness policy. And a few years ago, we added this information to the Healthy Active Children report, because so much of this is exactly what we're asking our school advisory councils to do and be involved in. I'll get to a few highlights. In the last year, we've seen a 5% improvement in the number of LEAs that are engaging their stakeholders in the development, implementation, and evaluation of their local wellness policy. This engagement of stakeholders is key to successful implementation. People in the community need to be involved in that local wellness policy. More of our districts are offering nutritious meals and appealing meals in combination with nutrition education. Almost in every area around nutrition education, we've seen increases this year. Incorporating nutrition education into the regular classroom, teaching the healthful living essential standards, making sure, it's interesting, you can provide appealing choices, but we also have to teach students how to make those healthy choices and get them to practice a little bit. And so that's a good collaboration. Also, we've seen our districts move further away from food rewards to non-food rewards, which we've been encouraging for quite some time, and they're continuing to make that improvement. And then finally, our school nutrition section, they're pretty amazing. They do a summer culinary institute funded by, I think, Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation, the USDA, where they actually work with nutrition staff throughout the summer, teaching them how to increase the availability of appealing, nutritious foods for our students. So if you get a chance to see Dr. Harvey and her staff, they rock. They've done some really good work around that, and they continue to do good work with our districts. But our districts are doing some great work on their own, and I have just a little bit of time, a couple seconds, so I'm going to go through just a few of these, not all of them. These are successes that our districts have turned into us. The LEAs have let us know. One of those, Asheville City Schools does a parent university. Really pretty cool. It's an opportunity for parents to take classes in health and wellness, social issues, student engagement, also academic support. So it's a really neat program that they have working in Asheville. This one's really cool. Granville County Schools. The principal at one of the schools presented at the Whole Child Conference for the ASCD Whole Child Conference, and they looked at their third grade reading proficiency. And when they first started in 1 year, they had recess once a day. So the next year, the principal broke the recess up, gave it a little bit more time and broke it up into 15 minutes in the morning, 15 in the afternoon, and look at the increase in reading, in third grade reading proficiency. Now, I can't say that's the only thing that did it, but they didn't change any other practices. That principal's at a different school now. I'll tell you next year if that happened again. And if it did, we'll know. I mean, it'll help us see if what that data means.
Make sure that don't go back down.
Excuse me?
Make sure you watch that, make sure it doesn't go back
That's
down.
right. Make sure they continue to do that recess and see if it goes back down. Carteret County Schools, they presented to the General Assembly earlier on the year about some of this work. They provide youth mental health first aid for a lot of their employees so that they can recognize and refer students who need mental health supports. And they also have implemented a program called Signs of Suicide with their middle school students. And they did a lot of homework. They did a lot of community education and make sure parents were on board with this. And the students came and presented to the General Assembly earlier in the year and have really said it was a really helpful program for them to be able to support their fellow students around issues of suicide and mental health. And then the Daily Mile, we won't be able to show this video. I'd encourage you, there's a video link on here about a school district, Rowan Salisbury, that allows students to get 15 minutes a day outside walking, and often with their teachers. And that allows them to have conversations they wouldn't normally have with their teachers, so it builds that student-teacher rapport as well as getting that physical activity in throughout the day. And then last month, I mentioned to you that one of our districts had not a school garden, but a school field. And that is Halifax, and I just wanted to bring you a couple pictures because they have RGAP certified and have really done some good work with their nutrition programs and with making sure the community has access to some of this food that they raise as well. So I thought I would share that with you. Bottom line, and we'll keep giving this mantra every time I stand up here, healthy children learn better. And if there's anything we can do to make that happen, that's what we're going to continue to work on. Questions?
Anyone has any questions? I think we can take a couple minutes, but I just want to say Ellen Essex has a lot of passion for this work, as do her colleagues Bert and Les, and of course Lynn Harvey in nutrition you mentioned. But you know, that reading score is compelling because, you know, active bodies, active minds. Don't y'all feel better after getting up moving around a little bit?
I feel better after watching Eric do it.
Thank you very much for a powerful presentation, and we look forward to hearing it every year.
One quick comment.
Mr. McDowell.
Just a quick suggestion. Who receives a SHAC report, 5% county commissioners, and local board of health is 22%. It just strikes me that that's also associated with the return. I think that perhaps partnering with the Association of County Commissioners and trying to make this a high-level issue at some point, even on their state agenda, would elevate it with, even with our own local boards, but it would particularly, the county commissioners appoint the boards of health. And if the county commissioners elevated that, then I think you'd find all of those numbers going up. And then every year they negotiate, the boards of education have to negotiate with the county commissioners for money. So all of that could be part of that larger conversation. I think Association of County Commissioners might be a good partner moving forward.
Great idea. We're happy to start making that connection.
And I think as we see the whole child model
Good point, yeah.
continue to grow, we will see more of that. But I think that's a great suggestion. And I will just say that Mr. McDevitt said he never understood what recess was because it always got withheld from him. And I told him when I was a second grade teacher, I used to refer to that as self-punishment because if he'd been in my class, I would have wanted him out. So I never understood why teachers withheld recess. That just was, I couldn't imagine doing that. But thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Our next item is another new business item, and this is the safety app update. And Kim Martin is here as the director for the Center for Safer Schools to tell us the updates on this anonymous tip reporting app that is hopefully in the works. And you know what you saw in this last presentation was number one concern, right, or number two concern, right after mental health, and I think the things are related, is school safety, and so this is urgent news.
Yes, great segue from Whole Child to the school safety app, since it is such an important component of the Whole Child. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of the anonymous reporting app for students, which we actually began thinking about and planning for 4 years ago, and also a status update as to where we are right now with taking the student app statewide. The Center for Safer Schools has been working to find ways to involve our students in school safety efforts since we began several years ago. And the Anonymous Safety App application is an extension of that work and an important aspect toward a comprehensive approach to school safety. So involving our students, the whole idea of student engagement, this is all what led to anonymous reporting application. I'm going to just keep going because I know you all have the PowerPoint.
We do have it, so they'll get it up in just a minute for the audience.
So students know things that school administrators and faculty need to know. Whether it's a conversation they're having with their peers, on their social media accounts, overhearing conversations in the cafeterias or hallways or other gathering places, students see and hear things every day that concern them. And they have a unique insight into their peers that we cannot have because we do not have the teen brain and the youth brain. So they have a unique perspective in being able to pick up warning signs of concern from their peers and fellow students, and often pick up on behavior that we, the adults in the school, might miss. If we give them ways to share that information, we'll be able to learn a lot from them. 80% of school shooters tell one or more people before they act. And this is true in all of the school shootings that we have learned about going on for many years prior to Columbine, but certainly seeming to escalate in the last year or so. In 2/3 of the school shootings, the persons who knew about the shooting, from what the shooter had shared, was a peer, a friend, a schoolmate, or a sibling. So clearly, students and peers, are the ones that will often pick up on these things. Prior to most school shootings, other students knew that the shooting was going to occur, but failed to notify an adult or somebody at their school or even at home that they had heard about this and were concerned about it. So we need to find ways to encourage students to notify someone. %90 of students reported that they would use or consider using an online and anonymous reporting tool, if their school had one, to report their school safety concerns. And if you look at students, or if you look at your children, teens if you have them, they're often focused on their phone. So it's not that great a surprise that they might download an app on their phone and use that to send in tips. But anonymous reporting does not need to replace relationships. We still need our students to form relationships at their school where they're comfortable in sharing concerns. We want them to be able to go to their SRO, their counselor, their teacher as well. This is just another way that they can share their information with a trusted adult at their school. And some students, we have learned, will only do it if it is anonymous. So it may also be a very important piece. Reasons that students may not report school safety concerns at their school or community. They don't want to worry their parents. They feel like, getting mom to come to the school because they're concerned about something may not be the best way to go. Having no confidence that there's going to be a change because they report something. They may have said something in the past and nothing happened. Thinking that parents or teacher involvement would make the situation worse. And there are certainly situations where that is true. Not wanting to be thought of as a snitch, fearing retaliation, and we've had several situations that have come to the attention of the center where students have told and then they were targeted at their school for retribution. So feeling shame and not being able to stand up for themselves and feeling that they wouldn't be believed if they shared the information. We need to find ways to encourage them to report safely and to be responsive as the adults at the school if they come to us with their school safety concerns. When youth realize that they have the power to influence decisions in their community or school level, they will rise among their peers and begin to show signs of leadership. Engaging youth in the school creates a sense of belonging and purpose for those youth. Youth who are engaged are less likely to use drugs and alcohol, drop out of high school, and be involved in criminal activity. It does require adults to listen to the concerns of youth, act more quickly to the threats that harm them, and engage youth in meaningful activities. It needs to be a partnership. Listening to youth may not always bring you what you want to hear, but things that you need to hear. We have students on our task force for safer schools. We've been involved in a lot of public hearings recently where students have shared their concerns. And, everybody may not want to hear that they feel like their teacher doesn't really care about them. We may not want to hear that they don't trust the SRO at their school or whatever the case may be, but these are things we need to hear because their perspective is important. So a few years ago, we received a grant from the Governor's Crime Commission, and we piloted Speak Up, an anonymous reporting application. And we had a student group, and the students actually came up with the name. Speak Up NC is the text talk, and that's why it looks a little bit different, but that's what the students wanted to call it. They would download it from the Apple iTunes store or the Android market, and they would have to register for their school, so the tips would go to their school. They recommended the 6 reporting categories that you see up there. 1 to report bullying, drugs, underage drinking, fighting, weapons, and the reported category was the generic category, where if it didn't fit somewhere else, they could use that one. The Task Force on Safer Schools, our mental health professionals that work with us, recommended that when there was a suicide concern or a mental health concern, it needed to go to a trained mental health professional immediately. So we developed a relationship with the North Carolina Suicide Prevention Hotline, where when they engaged that bar, it would go outside of the app and somebody would pick it up in actually Greenville is where it's located, and it's a national hotline as well. But they could immediately talk to a trained mental health professional who would then go back to the school and share information with the school as well. One of the main characteristics of the application that was important to the students is that when they send their tips in, the person at the school receiving the tip has to designate that they received the tip they're investigating the tip or whatever the status is. But they wanted to know that their tip had been received and that something was taking place to address their concerns.
And can you give us where was this piloted, or how many students actually downloaded the app?
There were almost 3,000 downloads over the life of the pilot.
Is that 3,000 different downloads, not?
Yes.
Okay.
And how were students invited to participate in how did they find out about the app, and how were they asked to download the app?
We used our student engagement group to develop posters and strategies for marketing to their peers. And we worked with the schools who agreed to pilot the application to educate the students, to share information with the students about the application. What the students have told us, though, it really needs to be peer-to-peer. And we worked through some of the clubs and organizations that were in schools, like whether it be the student government organization. A lot of schools have an anti-bullying club, clubs that deal with human trafficking or some other safety aspect. But the clubs of the students pushed it out through their clubs and organizations to their fellow peers and students.
And what districts were targeted for this pilot?
Avery County was our first county to join, and of course that's a very small county. Macon County from the far west joined and participated for the whole life of the project, which was almost 3 years. Forsyth County used it in a few of their schools. They didn't want us to do it district-wide, so they did 30 or so schools, if I'm recalling correctly. And Johnston County did some schools. Lenoir County did their whole school district, and Wayne County, Goldsboro, was the most recent county to participate. And they were going strong at the end of the pilot.
So the longest pilot has been Avery County, and that's 3 years.
Yes.
And there are 3,000 downloads across all those counties. And what is the number of reports we've had from those 3,000 apps? I know you're coming up, and I'm going to quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but you've got the next slide has percentage of reports, but what's the number of reports that we've had? See the percentage, but percentage of what number?
Yeah. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I can look back into the data from the application, because the application also spilled out data at the end of every month about the types of tips.
I think that would be helpful to know the number of reports that we've had out of that 3,000.
So most of the tips were related to bullying, as we might expect, and it's critical to address those bullying tips because that can often escalate. The students really like to use the generic danger category. I think they probably didn't want to think through which category it fit into, so they would just quickly hit that one. And we received some things through there that we really didn't expect to receive, like inappropriate relationships between teachers and students, coaches and students. There were self-harm games that middle school students were playing, and there were several suicide-related tips that came through the danger category, for example. And then drugs were the next highest. There were just a handful of tips related to weapons, but of course those were the ones that we acted on as quickly as possible, reached out to the school to make sure that if they needed any support and that they were moving forward with those investigations as quickly as possible. There wasn't an overwhelming number of tips. A lot of the schools felt like, how are we going to deal with this? on a daily basis, because we may spend our whole day investigating. The highest number of tips we received were in Goldsboro. They received 40 a week for the first couple weeks of the pilot, when they had just marketed it to the students, and the students were very tuned into it. But it's not going to be overwhelming unless an incident occurs at the school, I suspect. And then there could be a lot. Some of the tips that we received, the ones that resulted in arrests, were there was a drug deal on campus. A student had taken a picture of it going down, and so that was an arrest. And then the ones related to relationships between teacher and students resulted in arrest. The suicide risk and self-harm games have been reported, and trained mental health professionals as well as the school counselors got involved. An underage drinking party, we actually received an invitation. They'd taken a picture of it. And the sheriff went to the party, and I think it probably wasn't that much fun at that point, but prevented some students from potentially driving home, under the influence. There were gun threats in several cases. One was related to a mental health situation, and there was actually a note written about that one. And some fights were preempted by the staff showing up there to make sure that the fight did not occur.
I think if we look at and I know I'm getting a little bit of an eye here from our chairman, but I know we've learned some lessons. We have this information that people have had in front of them. And as we look at what's coming up, there was an appropriation from the legislature for $5 million to develop an app. And I want to get kind of to the heart of that, because I talked to a couple of people on the Governor's Crime Commission who met last week. I assume you were there as part of the safety.
I went to the one in Greenville, not the one in Greensboro, yeah.
Okay, well, I think the questions there were about something we actually just heard about from the Allegheny County folks, which is they are already using the Sandy Hook Promise app, which is free. And I think we have some other districts using it. I know the state of Pennsylvania is using that. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to us about that app, because that was the question that came up in Greensboro, is why wouldn't we use that free app that is already up and running? And we do know this is urgent. School safety is an urgent need. So why wouldn't we opt to use that one?
We certainly can use that one. I mean, it's we're in the middle of the procedures in procurement right now, and any vendor can apply for that and issue a request for proposal. We sent out a request for information back in April and May of last year to try to get an idea of what vendors were out there, what pricing might be involved, and the Sandy Hook Promise did not respond. Came to our attention later, after that process, as well as a few other vendors, who missed the RFI. So, it's an open market, anybody
Mr.
could
Buxton.
apply.
Good question. Just, I understand the Sandy Hook app. What I'm really not understanding is the Speak Up app. So we developed it, or
It was a pilot.
we piloted it.
Yes.
And so we decided not to scale that, but to start over with a new development of a new app?
Yes, because, the pilot ended, and we started hearing about other vendors, who could provide the service, and thought that the best way to go was through the public market to give all vendors, potential vendors, the opportunity to apply and see who comes closest to the requirements that we have put in place, that need to be part of the project.
So the Speak Up app did not meet our requirements.
There were things, it's old now because it was 3 years ago, so it would have needed to be updated because it was already old technology. by the time, you know, this came up, whether the company that did speak up, applies or not, we don't know, but because it's an open market, they could apply.
And
as could any vendor.
have you begun meeting with vendors?
No, we're not to that point yet. We're just getting it out on the market right now.
Last one. Why would the Sandy Hook Challenge, if it's free to everyone, why would they reply to an RFP? That's what I'm just not understanding the $5 million in the free app.
If they look at the requirements and saw maybe they didn't meet all of the requirements, they could partner with somebody to fill in that piece, which is actually what Pennsylvania did.
Are you talking about why Sandy Hook didn't?
Yeah, I mean,
they're not a vendor because it's free.
It's free. They're just putting it out there.
They're just out there. That would be on us to say, hey, we think we'd like to use this. It's free. Okay. Well, I look forward to, and I see the lawyer stand up, which is never a good idea. I just complimented him keeping us out of jail for at least almost as long as he's been here. But there are some lessons learned. I think there are a lot of questions moving forward on this. I understand that we're in the RFP process, and you know, I just want to make sure that we are very good stewards of public money, and making sure that, you know, if we need to spend $5 million to keep our students safe, that's money well spent in my book. But if we don't, if there's something equally good, I hope that we are really vetting and looking for all those things. And you know, I know there's several vendors who are interested in this work, but I just want to keep all our options open.
One other aspect is the panic alarm aspect that DPS is working on creating. And there is our former vendor, our former application was able to do a panic alarm as well as the student app. And so we may hear that we can integrate the two, you know, into one product. I know that DPS, Emergency Management, is going to be asking for, I believe, $4.7 million to do that panic alarm for schools.
I just want to make sure that as we move forward, we have one thing that really works for our students. So, Mr. Chair, did you have a comment or question?
Ms. Martin, thank you for this report and the work that your team's doing. It's pretty obvious the board's really interested in the work you're doing, and so we'd request that you provide periodic updates through Ms. Willoughby's committee to the board, just because this type of public dialogue helps build awareness, which builds credibility, which builds trust in the process that we're using, and ultimately the outcome that we'll deliver for our students. So particularly before any contracts are awarded or money spent, we'd really like to be informed and kept up to date of the progress on this. Okay?
Yes, and I would add just quickly, we call it the student app, but teachers used it, parents used it, you know, it'll be on the public market. And so, you know, anybody besides students, but our primary focus and market is the students right now.
Mr. Chair, do we do an incident, for lack of a better term, an incident debriefing to determine gaps or better practices following quote-unquote events? I mean, and I don't know how far you go with that, but there's one a day in media in North Carolina that's at some level where someone had a conversation at lunch that turned into reporting.
You mean specifically incidents involving safety?
Yes.
Well, as part of our yearly report on crime and violence that we get, I think in about February or March or something, and I think to your point, then what?
Yeah, then, I mean, after the incident has been contained, then, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And I know at least on one, I read a lot about the reunification issue. You know, parents were just really frightened because they had no, or at least the way this read, there was not they had no way of communicating with their children And it was just it was, I mean, I get it, I get it, we'd all be panicked. So, and I don't want to get into fixing it as much as I want to say is that's one of many issues that might be identified as part of the larger picture, and all of us have a number of ideas, but I hope some of our ideas that we're doing here have been tested. I mean, the reason for a pilot is to determine that, and when you're talking about advocacy, to assure that we're communicating in ways that make sense. So,
great, Ms. Wilby.
And I think just as a final comment, and that will end our committee, but I think it might be helpful to have at least a brief report, if not monthly, every other month, but probably monthly, because this is sort of imminent, what we're going to do to address this.
Agreed.
And maybe we should invite Allegheny County to come back and tell us about, I know that's a small district, but they are using that, or maybe we should reach out to Pennsylvania and see how that work is going.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, let's do that.
The mental health stuff would be great to have as part of this bigger picture.
Agreed. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. I'm going to say one thing that's not on the next report very quickly, and it's actually a commendation in this area of school safety, and hopefully an incident nobody had to read about. But there was an incident in Virginia Beach, I think, on Monday, in which a gentleman had a serious disagreement with family members, stole a family member's car, and drove to Greensboro, where he had a hit list of 5 family members that he wanted to cause harm to, and 2 of them happened to be employees, or at least at one time both were, at Ben L. Smith Senior High School. This gentleman walked into the school and walked into the cafeteria and was fully armed with multiple firearms and fully loaded with ammunition when an assistant principal noted it in the cafeteria and immediately started ushering, with the help of one of the faculty members there, ushered the students out of the cafeteria as quickly as they could, and she reported to the SRO officer, who responded very quickly and ended up in a chase and ultimately capturing this gentleman without shots being fired other than a taser shot that the taser was used to ultimately control him. But it's a quick reminder that our #1 line of defense has been, will be, the braveness and courage of our educators. Our educators are absolutely on the front lines, and of all the things we talk about, that we put on the responsibility as educators, and there are many, the passion, care, and love for their students, and all too many educators in this country have sacrificed their life in caring and protecting their students. And so we're blessed in North Carolina, along with many other states, with educators who have gone way beyond the call of duty in terms of these incidents. And I will say the parents were actually very complimentary about the reunification process in that instance, so maybe we are getting some lessons learned as we go along.
And it may be that there's different systems in place in different systems.
Right, yeah. Very good. Well, that brings us to our last committee work of the day. Mr. Duncan.
All right, well, we have just a couple items, and the first one is a Hurricane Florence relief allotment adjustments to ADM, which is brought about by the legislature's actions this fall since the time of the hurricane. Alexis Schaus is here to report to us.
Thank you. Good evening, afternoon. It feels like evening. So Senate Bill 3 was passed in the middle of October, and it had items for school districts and in the way that we allocate their funds and make adjustments to their allotments due to differences in their allotted average daily membership and the actual average daily membership. Per previous legislation, LEAs are initially funded based on the higher of a projection in a prior year, and then when the actual average daily membership comes in, they are adjusted if it is below that, based on the higher of the first and the second month of average daily membership. The Senate Bill 2 made modifications for those school districts that are designated under the Major Disaster Declaration as a result of Hurricane Florence, and they will be adjusted based on the higher of the first 4 months. So the allotment policy manual, the changes that are in your materials reflect the changes to the school district adjustments. The second piece of it is that for charter schools, lab schools, and the innovative school districts who are funded per state board policy on the first month average daily membership, this policy recommends the change to be consistent with both the legislation and with the LEA's funding, that they will be adjusted, and their final funded average daily membership will be based on the first 4 months. So these are the changes made to the allotment policy manual, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any.
This will be an action item on first reading if anyone has any questions or comments. All right. Thank you very much.
You.
And I should say I'm reporting along with Todd Chastain on behalf of the Business Operations Committee, all of which I missed on the front end. Our second item is a discussion item, follow-up on board discussion that first arose as we took a look at the proposed extension budget related to business modernization items, and we asked for additional reports. And I believe we have Dr. Michael Spano, our Director of School Business Systems Modernization, and Mr. Phil Emer, Director of Technology Planning and Policy from the Friday Institute, both here to provide us with that updated report that we had asked for. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, esteemed board, and my colleagues for having me here. As you know, modernization's been around for about 3 years. Go ahead, next, here it is. I thought I was going to have it. There was legislation passed in 2017 to go develop a plan. That plan was approved in this very room in May. Then it was funded. 2017 Bill 716 was funded, 19 million in the first year, 10 million in the second year, and they directed us to go off and hire someone, that would be me, build a project management office, and begin to plan to go ahead. There was a minor tweak in the following year. So what does the plan say? It says that the LEAs and charter schools are the source of most of the data that feeds this agency, which then feeds the board, which then feeds the legislature. Why is it important to modernize? Most of these systems are AS400s. They use a format called CSV. Most people think of it as Excel, but it was really invented in 1972 to move data between Fortran on a mainframe. So it predates my tenure at IBM of 37 years by 7 years. So it's that old. So I'm not saying I'm old, but it's an old standard. Yes, it still works, but it doesn't do what we really need to do. And Phil mentioned on the way up here that I always tell the story of when I retired from IBM, I didn't get the gold watch. My dad passed away, I got his gold Rolex. And I love that watch. It's a great watch, it tells time. My kids got me an iPhone watch. It tells time, but it does so much more. It's a good way to think of why are we modernizing. The systems we have, amazingly enough, still work. They work, they get the job done, but not without what I call superheroes and spreadsheets. People at the LEAs working extra overtime besides their day job to feed us information. So that's one of the reasons why we're modernizing. These systems have passed, they're not approaching their end of life. They've passed their end of life. We've been on borrowed time. So we've got to keep moving. You all know UERS, Uniform Education Reporting System. I sometimes call it a specification because there is no physical system. It's a set of rules that tells the LEAs what we need as far as data. Right now it's been systematized to the finance level. We know very well how to bring in CSVs of finance data. What we don't do really well is bring in, on a more automated manner, student information, applicant data for teaching positions, open teaching positions, those kinds of things. So we want to expand UERS to take that into account. Why do we want to do that? Because part of this mission is data transparency, is to provide transparent data to the division, to the board, to the legislature, so that we can make decisions, informed decisions with data that's timely and not old, not pulled together, summarized, sometimes based on different measurement systems. UERS does that for us. We then take that data and store it in something called an operational data store. I think Todd asked me on the briefing what that stood for, but that's where all of our data would sit so that reports can be written in one place. We do that now, but it takes heroic efforts to do that. It'll be transparent, it would be instantaneous in the real world with modern LEA systems. So the modernization will go and build ERP systems. Again, another acronym for Enterprise Resource Planning. Those are the systems that you use when you go to a checkout, We do things like that when you order stuff from Amazon, those kinds of systems. We're not looking for one like that. We're looking for one that does some of those things, HR, finance, payroll. We would require comprehensive planning and design for the entire state. It's a very, very large ask. 1.65 million students, lots of schools, 115 districts, 200 charters. It's a big ask. The plan called for 150 million in total over 5 years, up to 250 million in one-time charges. The good news is we're going to be well below that. So what does it mean to be modern? Well, if you've ever used an AS400, it has a green glowing phosphorus screen with a flashing cursor and no mouse. So that's not modern. What is modern is the ability for a single system that you can log in and be finance or HR. Sounds simple enough, but if you go out to the LEAs, they have one system for finance, one system for HR that don't talk to each other. Data has to be exchanged either manually or through CSVs, again, that's standard. Now, that in itself is hard, but there is a data gap. There's a gap even organizationally where the HR department sometimes operates outside of the finance department, and there's problems there. So there's an org issue, there's a data issue, there's a systems issue. The other problem is it needs to be accessible by modern devices. When I say modern, I mean things like you're all probably typing on when you're listening to me or looking at to see what's happening on your phone. It'd be nice if you could actually pull up active teacher count on here or ratios or whatever. It's not a big ask. We all do it every day. We check our email, we check the weather, we check the traffic. It's not a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do based on AS400s. So we have to modernize those. We really want to provide automated access to the data. You're hearing me over and over again talk about data. Data is the most important thing to everyone in this room and everyone listening. Our grades are based on data. Our teacher pay is based on data. Everything is based on some piece of data somewhere. Data is the thing we need to manage the most and protect the most. It needs to operate in the cloud so we can get these people that are doing these heroic efforts at the LEAs back to their jobs, whether it's an accountant, an HR rep, a teacher, a bus driver, those people that work extra hours at night to produce data for us. So that's the whole goal of that. We're also going to modernize ourselves, the agency. We have some archaic systems ourselves. We also have lots of superheroes. So, why do we want to do this? I'm not going to take too much time on this chart. You all know what it means to be modern and why it's important. Things happen fast, they happen without you doing it, and you can look at them from anywhere in the world at any time. So I'm going to let you read that chart another day. During this journey, what I found is that it's not as easy as I thought it would be. As if the AS400 problem wasn't enough, there is software on these things that is equally as old. And so part of my journey has to be stabilizing the existing landscape. So in other words, I can't just go and modernize everything. By the time we get there, some of these LEAs will be broken. So we have to take a little sidestep and stabilize. So what's happened over the past year that I've been here is there's been a migration from, say, 59, we'll call it Link as one of the vendors, to 69 Link vendors. So there's been some organic movement in the actual supplier of software service. One is slightly more modern than the other, and so they move back and forth. But you can see that there are two other vendors for the very large LEAs. So there's a big disparity. If I could, I'd show you a chart. You probably all know it better than I do. Is we have two very large districts, a couple medium-sized districts, and it tapers down to a lot of small districts. So one system is really going to be difficult to put in. So what I've done when I looked at the programs with Phil's help and his teams, we broke it down into basically 4 areas. The program management office, that's the office that oversees everything, the planning, the money, bringing in vendors, doing the ERP, vendor RFPs. I was very fortunate enough to find a team in place here at the agency that was scheduled to be sunset in June. I was able to pick them up and turn them into the PMO. Amazing team of people. So kept some people in the agency that are amazing and doing a great job. We then look at LEA modernization. You'll hear RFP, ERP RFP, and before Eric gets up, I can't talk about that, but I can talk around it. And if Eric gets up, I'll stop talking around it. But we have an RFP out there for the replacement of the ERP. We're getting near the end. Then there's going to be a bunch of RFPs for agency modernization. We already got some of those going on. I think you heard about the anonymous tip line. There's other things going on inside the agencies. But it really sits on a bed of data transparency, management, and analysis. The key to that is these are all tied to the Ernst & Young. I'm sure you've heard that name before. When I started here, Ernst & Young came into this study. Interestingly enough, 5 of their findings were about this program without even saying it. One, establish a central repository for sources that validates and maintains data. That's the bottom part of that chart up there. Bolster and embed analytics capability across key programs. Again, it's the bottom part of that area, data. Align, coordinate, and potentially streamline assessments. Also data. But then you move into implement a vendor-first approach for application services and prioritize cloud hosting. That would be the LEA modernization and the agency modernization. And then lastly, design and implement a future state application portfolio that streamlines the entire operation. That would be, again, the two middle pieces. The little rectangular piece you see up there, it's called the Education Business Systems Advisory Committee, EBSAC for short. It's quite a coup. It's comprised of HR and finance representatives from the 8 regions. Now that sounds easy, but they have their conferences on the opposite sides of the state at the same time. That's how well they communicate. Now they meet regularly, provide me valuable data, and they provide me an insight into the LEAs, their needs, their wants, how things are going, priorities. So what have we done to date? We've hired me, established the PMO, we've engaged the LEAs through the various meetings, NC ASBO, PANC. HRMS Steering Committee is now no longer. I disbanded it and formed EBSAC. We have all the business systems RFPs have included LEAs, large, small, low wealth, and even included HR, finance, and superintendents. So we had a representation of people on our selection committee. Virtually all the AS400 systems are migrating or scheduled for migration to the EdClef, hosted by SAS. That takes the burden off of them, so much so that we're saving the LEAs $2 million annually in expenses that they don't have to pay for the hosting. We pick up that tab. We're expanding the URS definitions as we speak. We have version 0.9, getting ready to release the very first version. We've stood up an ODS, again, the operational data store, a warehouse, and dashboards. We've had our first dashboard online. Second dashboard is in quality assurance. Once that's all ready, we'll make it known and make it published. I'm going to go a little bit over the budget, but I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Phil Emer. He's been doing this long before I joined, so he can really tell you about the model we've built. So the largest piece of the money that we're looking for is for modernizing the LEAs. 70% of that is for the LEAs. 25% of it's for agency modernization. 23% of it roughly is for program management. But you can see there's very, very small money going to stabilization. Data transparency, although it's a large piece, out of the overall budget, it's not so large because it's a one-time build it and then expand it. So this was the schedule for the ERP timeline. We started in March. We ran heads down till August. There were some organizational challenges in September, October. There was a competing RFP. I cannot mention anything about it, but that also took resources away and we couldn't negotiate with one of our vendors because they were negotiating with another part of the state. But we're now back on track, so we should have this wrapped up by the end of the year. And then a couple more weeks of review in January. Our expectation is first quarter, it will hit the streets. Now, to me, coming from business, it seems like a long time. Me, after a year in government, it seems like we'll get it to the street in about half the usual time. So it's moving quickly. So what I'm going to talk about right now is 2017, 2018, I had $29 million. The good news is I didn't consume it all. You can see a little bit of it trickling over to the right to 2019, which means my biennial ask will be smaller than I would have normally asked had I consumed that money. The 5-year cost is roughly $154 million, roughly $30 million a year. We now have a detailed model Phil will talk about in a minute that actually built those numbers. So we're looking for in our first biennial $51 million, followed by 60 with an ongoing $14 million expense. So the expansion budget we talked about. We have 2 more budget biennials. The recurring funding will probably be the most questions you'll ask me at the end, so I'll save that for then. The expenditures over the year are predominantly for one-time investment costs, and then the first year. And this is for each LEA. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Phil Emer, who's built the model.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to back up for just a second to this chart to start at the top. So the $54 million number is a 5-year number and was based on a comprehensive model. So the things in that model consider sizes of districts, what platforms they might migrate to, when they'll migrate, the complexity of that migration, replacing systems at the department, new costs there, both one-time and recurring. So it includes all of that data. And we munge on it a little bit and actually got it down to a granularity of year by year. So that's what I'm going to show you next. So the $154 million number is, when I say solid, it's rock solid, but it's also somewhat indisputable. Once you get below that, it's difficult, right? Because we could say, how long do you want to take? If you want to take 8 years, the number is the same. We can just spread it over 8 years. What we've done here is built a model that we think is the right thing. It's the right set of decisions. We don't want to extend this project too long because then you'll have to start over, right? There's a new set of problems that you'll have to solve. So there are lots and lots of decisions that are variables in the model, but those things are, we think, optimized. So now I want to show you this chart. Yes, sir.
Ongoing 14 million, is that recurring? That same as recurring 14, right?
So so what I would say is the model talks about one-time costs and then let's call them subscription costs that will in fact be recurring. And in fact, that model goes on forever. Those recurring costs include both LEA costs and department costs. What the legislation does not address, nor the plan addresses, is who's responsible for that. So we'll get a little bit into that detail.
How does that relate? I'm sorry. How does that relate to the 30 million in the next slide? That is 30 million expansion recurring. Because it sounds like 14 million is recurring as well, but I understand it's a different. It's capital, and I'm assuming it's capital costs as opposed to.
I would say.
Is it included? It's not inclusive in the 30 million.
It is in the 5 years. So in the 5-year model of 154 million, I would say that the 30 million recurring is a conceptual number that was built to acknowledge, I think, the first bullet up there is the most important, that the funding that will be required to implement the entire program will extend beyond a single biennial budget, I think, is the important takeaway from here. And then how that will translate to a specific legislative ask will probably be developed over the long session. So in this model here, this is the complete program cost. So this is $154 million worth of cost spread over really 5 years plus the rest of fiscal 18-19. So you see there on the far left that 13 million is the expected expenditures in this program in fiscal 18-19. So what we've already done plus the rest of the 6 months. We anticipate having contracts soonish such that we'll actually have some expenditures on, for instance, this LEA ERP system come the first half of 19. The rest of this is, again, the projections that the model has built, both for LEA expenditures and for DPI expenditures in the categories that Mike mentioned previously. So LEA modernization, DPI modernization, the program management office, the reporting data transparency things, and stabilization. And so I'll go to the next, when we mush all those numbers together, and we then look at what does the biennial budget look like after we spend the carryover from 2018-19, there's $12 million that would be necessary in fiscal 2019-20, and another $39 million for the second year of the biennium, which, as you can tell, is exactly the number on the third bar. So these are, again, getting to modeling costs in years, and then that will need to, of course, be translated somehow at the legislature into some kind of funding answer. Now this chart, which looks similar to the last one, just addresses the LEA modernization part since it's the biggest hunk, and it's where we have to migrate districts from one set of finance and HR systems to new ones. And so it's a little bit hard to read up there, but the first bar shows that in year one, we're going to target 8 pilot districts. And then year 2, the model has 26 districts, and so on and so forth until we've addressed all the districts. And you see that in year 5, there are no districts being migrated. So you've now achieved steady state. And so that number, for instance, that 12 million is LEA subscription costs to sustain what we will have now just migrated to. So
I think Ms. Willoughby has a question at this point.
I just want to be clear that all LEAs will be required to use the system. Is that correct?
So it is currently an opt-in model. However, one of the decisions that certainly has to be made here soon is how we address the LEAs and tell them you shall be modern or you need to become modern. This is the definition of modern as put into the plan. The way we built the RFP even provided some prioritization, as Mike mentioned, for finance systems, for instance. 52 of the districts are currently sitting on green screens. They're prioritized, but we would certainly suggest in the model that we've been working on that it probably makes a whole lot of sense for all districts to end up at a modern system.
Well, I understand that. You know, we just had a report where we require 100%, you know, participation in the Healthy Active Children report, and we have to sort of pull teeth just to do that. So,
sure.
My question is, are they going to be required to use it, or is that some policy development we need? And how will you let them know if their cost will go up or down depending on their decision to opt in? I guess you said opt in. I'm going to quote you, Phil. Opt in to this.
Right. Well, I think the point you made initially is right on. I think there does need to be some rule or policy established that directs districts and charter schools to move, that they have to migrate to some modern system as is defined by the plan. And then the modeling work that we've done provides at least the answer to the question. So we can show an LEA what the new cost will be depending on their decision. Calculating exactly how much more that is going to be than they're currently paying is a little bit more complex a problem. I like to say that if I had a modern system, I could tell them that. We do know in big chunks, however. So for instance, Wake and Charlotte moving to a software as a service cloud-based system probably saves them money, because now they have small stables of COBOL programmers, either contract or in-house, that are keeping their systems running. And they don't need to do that anymore. If you're a very small district, your costs are going to be more, but let's say manageable. You know, you may be paying $10,000 a year or $20,000 a year for something that might double in price. The place where the largest increase is going to be are, let's say, the next largest dozen or so districts after Wake and Charlotte, because they're using very old systems and paying very little for them. And so their costs might go up by 10x, you know, or 8x. So a Winston that's paying $50,000 a year might have a $300,000 or $400,000 a year subscription cost, for sure. Now that's not the whole calculus, but it certainly could be a couple $100,000 increase.
This will be then, Mr. Buxton, then we'll try to let the presentation finish.
So this is not ever my forte, but the $30 million in recurring, is that going to cover the extra costs for the LEAs? I think I know the answer to that, but.
I don't know that that's been determined yet, but I don't think that was the intention of the initial
30 million doesn't really match what I see as the need, but that's another question. But for those medium-sized districts.
Right, I think it captures conceptually what you would do in a 5-year budget to cover the one-time costs. There definitely will need to be conversations, I'd imagine, about what happens with, currently the LEAs are responsible for funding these local systems, but a modern system is simply going to be more expensive, unless you're legacy system is a Rolex. If your legacy system is a Rolex, like in Wake and Charlotte, it might be cheaper.
Mr. Buxton.
Just quick, is it important for the districts to get this mechanism clear or this decision clear sooner so that they start budgeting over the next 4, 5, 6 years what this rollout is going to look like?
Certainly.
And so the options are statutory or this board?
I'm not in a position to say, but I would agree that some entity other than Mike and I would say that Mike Spano and I don't have the authority to tell the districts to do any of that.
And last question, if a district which is facing a 10x cost, Mr. Chairman, follow.
Yes.
District's facing a 10x cost and they say, yeah, we want to join this party, but we think we're going to go try to find a cheaper way to do this, does that present a problem?
It certainly is another part of the rule set that we're going to have to address. So I can only use examples in, I would say that in the past with things like, say, school connectivity or learning management systems that I've been involved in, they've also been opt-in, but we've been able to get 100% opt-in. Now, the way we do that is by doing things like we establish contracts, and then, for instance, in school connectivity, for the physical equipment, we say, if you use these contracts established by the department, then the department funds your out-of-pocket costs, right? And so now, again, these are not things that have yet been established as rules or policies, but things that are going to need to be established. Again, whether it's a rule or a policy or a carrot or a stick are things that we need to figure out here in the near term, but certainly near after we get these contracts established.
As you complete the report, to the extent you can work in the notion of what work has been done to give these districts a heads up about, they're going to view this as a very serious issue for a number of reasons.
Sure, sure.
So
And
if it's going to just come to them out the blue from your work, then we need to know that. If there's some heads up that's already gone on, that would be very helpful for us to know.
Mike can address it, but I
Very
can
good.
assure
You can
you
work
that
that in as you finish.
we've definitely talked substantially with the districts, and even creating these advisory structures, those folks have also spoken with the district. So I will get through this quickly. I think, in fact, we only have one more slide. This one is just a slightly different version of this slide, basically showing how many employees will have been covered now by transition systems. You could just as easily put migrated ADM on that sheet. So essentially what it shows is after year one, the pilot implementations, you'll have about 50,000 of the 170,000 FTE, right? And after year two, you'd have over 100,000. And so there's, in the first several years, you will pick up sort of 70% of the districts, but 90% of the people, right, covered in the, as in people that are getting paid by the payroll system, for instance. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to finish up.
Thank you, Phil. Co-Chairman Dunkman, a great question. We are actually working on a communications plan that we have to hold on until the ERP is done. But once we can talk about it, we've got a plan ready to go on how to communicate to the LEAs. And we're going to be doing that through the EPSAC, through the committees that they've elected. So we'll be getting communications out. We just can't do that until we know who the players are going to be. We know the costs. We just can't communicate the costs yet because we're still on an active RFP. Looking for Eric over my shoulder. But that's the problem. You have to keep it confidential until it's done. And then once it's done, we're going to be ready. We're not going to wait till then to communicate. We're going to have it ready to go. And there are some people on that committee that are under confidentiality that know about it and have been working with us on the communication. So great point. We're working with the LEAs because they're the one most affected. What I would add to Phil's eloquent explanation is the ongoing cost of $12 million for the LEA ERP. We don't know if it's $12 million or if it's $1 million. We don't know what the LEAs pay because we have no visibility to it. So they could be paying $11 million, and it's only $1 million that we have to add to that, so no costs go up for them. That's a model yet to be built. We can't build that model till they pick one of the vendors we choose. Then we'll know the costs associated with that, and then we'll know what year it's coming in. And so then we'll be able to lay out our biennial planning and answer those questions for you. But those questions are foremost in our mind. I meet with LEAs, if not once a day, 3 or 4 times a day, different LEAs, always wanting to know that same question. I mean, money's everything to them. and every penny they need. So every dollar we can get to offset that is going to be beneficial. But there's other costs that doesn't show up. Things like, how do you put that the HR rep is doing the report 3 hours a night? Those are the hidden costs that are hard to quantify, but we want to also consider those in there, because if I can free those 3 hours up for them to go hire teachers a week faster, that's money, that's problem solved. So these are the kinds of things, very good point, Mr. Buxton, about we need legislation, we need law, we need all kinds of things. That's the part we can't do. That's why I'm so glad to be here in front of you, soliciting your help, and eventually soliciting legislature's help, to get it to the point where they must modernize. And we want them to do that in a logical fashion. Everybody can't be first. We're not that big enough where we can do 115 LEAs in year one. So we need sort of a modernize the worst, move down, do gradually, but eventually everybody has to be modern. They have to be. Because eventually there'll be a new trend. Object-oriented is right around the corner. There are vendors out there that do things without databases. There are technologies that right now are leading edge that 5 years from now will be mainstream. So if we take 8 years to do this, we'll be doing this right in the middle all over again. So we got pressure, we got time, we got to go get money. So it's just like being back in the business world for me. I haven't talked much about agency modernization because it's in its infancy, but I look forward to coming back to you in the future and talking about the agency itself. And then, of course, data transparency when we finish that final QA. So with that, I'll open it up for questions.
And we welcome the agency modernization discussion. As soon as you're ready to come back with that, we're very interested in that as well. Questions, comments?
I have one.
Eric.
Mr. Spanos, thank you. And Mr. Emer, thank you for coming to present this. You can tell we're very interested in this because it has such an impact on the success of our students and teachers. And Mr. Spanos, I'm really glad that you're glad to be here and that you see that we have the desire to help, but we can only help if we're aware.
Absolutely.
And so I think similar to the previous item, we really need a frequent update on this. And we recognize there's aspects of this that have to be kept confidential. In fact, we're probably the group that most wants those things to be kept confidential in order to ensure the proper expenditure of taxpayer money and the validity of the decisions that are made and the ultimate result. But I think it would be really helpful, not just to us, but to the constituents that we all serve, to get a monthly update from you through Vice Chair Duncan's committee. You know, it's this type of public exchange just builds credibility and trust in what we're doing. And we know we can't answer all the questions. But being better informed equips us to be able to support your efforts when we're asked the questions. And so we look forward to future dialogue with you, and we really appreciate this work. This is long overdue, and we're so appreciative to the General Assembly for investing in this need, because we certainly need it.
Thank you so much, Chairman, and you came right back to it. It's data. You need data. You need it. You want it monthly. You want it weekly, whatever it is. You need the data. So nothing's really changed, and I appreciate the offer, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in the future, and I look forward to working with all the new board members as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Chair, this is our first report on this. This is good.
I have two quick questions. Just want to ask, just to finish out the report. There's discussion about ERP funding, and there's already in existence connectivity funding. Can any of the funding that's needed for ERP funding come from connectivity funding, or are they totally unrelated? That's a question I just don't understand, but I'm interested in the answer.
I would say that they're unrelated, other than that there are some similar. Right? Yeah. I don't know. I've been doing a lot of work on school connectivity for about the dozen years that it's existed, so I don't want to take any money from it. I would like to take some lessons from it because I think it's worked pretty well.
The second question is, as I was looking at, and this may not be a question for y'all, but as I was looking at the superintendent's organizational chart, it appears that this is currently aligned under the chief strategy officer, Ms. Gossage, but a lot of it has to do with, as I looked at the report, with modernizing finance, HR, licensure, payroll, and purchasing and contracts, which appears to be under the chief operating officer in the organizational structure. Has there been any discussion of which you're aware in terms of what the alignments would be for those particular positions in the organization? Or Ms. Gossage, can you address that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I work with both of them daily, so it's being addressed. And I see this as strategic, but along the way, it becomes non-strategic and falls right in.
And that's really the question, do we have ongoing
We all
alignment?
work together.
Yeah.
And it's been a great ad having Catherine join the team. It's been great pulling Chloe in the strategy. My background in IBM was, I was in strategy, business strategy, work strategy, tech strategy. So strategy for me is the long game, but it's also you got to really stabilize and get it done. So that's why I like having, you know, I hate having two bosses, but two minds I love.
So we should look ongoing. It's an ongoing alignment where you're working with both.
Absolutely,
in terms
sir.
of the, very good. That's very helpful to know. Those were the two questions I had.
Great. I look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing you in the future.
Anything else?
No, done.
Okay. Well, just to close that item, I'd like to express our appreciation to the Friday Institute for providing the really critical support on this item, as well as many others. And I understand that we're fortunate to have the interim director of the Friday Institute here, Dr. Hiller Spires. If you would please stand. Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to have you. Okay, that concludes.
One more thing.
Oh, yes, sorry.
For that. Last thing that we have is update on contracts, and as usual, we have the executed contracts report and the planned contracts report, and I just make sure there are no questions on those.
You have one. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to do this to you.
It's all right.
I did not catch it on the planned contracts, and I don't know if Tammy Howard is here or Eric, but we have an executed contract with Questar Assessments. The only thing I know of Questar Assessments is that Tennessee is about to kick them out of their state because of significant disruptions and problems with their online testing last year. And they have reopened the bid with Questar because of the significant issues they had. I just want to make sure whatever was happening in Tennessee, did we ask the questions and are we satisfied that that's not an issue with our $1.3 million contract with them here?
Good point. Excellent point.
See Dr. Hall approaching to address that question.
I heard my name. Is it okay to approach?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm not coming with any new information, but I will be happy to take that back and talk with Dr. Howard as we work on this next process.
Okay.
I can get you an update if that's okay, and maybe by tomorrow.
Sure, I can go through.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Bring that back.
Thank you.
Good information.
Any other questions, or does that conclude the biz op report? I believe we're finished. Thank you, Chairman Davis.
Great. That concludes our committee work. I thank board members, DPI staff, and other contributors who participated in this good work. I now ask for a motion to go into closed session and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the December 5, 2018 meeting will adjourn immediately. Is there such a motion?
There is.
Vice Chair Duncan.
I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to discuss personnel matters, any legal advice necessary, and to consult with our attorneys on attorney-client privilege matters, including 1, Hope County versus State of North Carolina and North Carolina State Board of Education, and 2, Alpha Academy, Inc. versus North Carolina State Board of Education. And as we get a second, I'd be asked to be recused for reasons stated in the past from the Hope County versus State of North Carolina litigation discussion.
Motion by Mr. Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Willoughby. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yeah.
Ms. Willoughby?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We're adjourned and we'll reconvene at 9 a.m. in the morning.
Giving us 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah. We'll be in